Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Ethan and Maya's friendship is an anchor in both of their lives. Having met during their time at university in London, they've been through countless ups and downs together. Ethan, a charismatic and thoughtful man, has always had a magnetic personality, which drew Maya to him initially. They've shared years of friendship, laughter, and secrets, which deepened Maya's feelings for Ethan. She's been a quiet admirer, keeping her feelings to herself and accepting her role as just a friend, hoping that one day Ethan might see her in a different light. Their close-knit bond becomes complicated when Ethan starts dating Sophia, a confident and enigmatic woman with a flair for drama. Sophia's charm is undeniable, but Maya can sense something superficial in her behavior. She's skeptical of Sophia's commitment to Ethan, but doesn't voice her concerns, wanting to respect Ethan's choices and avoid seeming judgmental. Ethan's infatuation with Sophia is intense. He's captivated by her unpredictability and allure, something he hasn't experienced before. Maya watches on the sidelines, supporting him through the highs of his relationship while quietly hiding her sadness. When Ethan discovers Sophia's infidelity, his world shatters. His trust issues, which he never acknowledged before, come rushing to the forefront. Heartbroken and feeling betrayed, Ethan turns to Maya for comfort, leaning on her more heavily than ever. He spirals into a state of self-doubt, questioning his worth and feeling lost without Sophia. This period of vulnerability becomes a catalyst for the complex situation that follows, as Ethan begins to depend on Maya in ways he never has before. As Maya becomes Ethan's primary emotional support, her feelings for him intensify. She's hopeful that her unwavering loyalty and love might finally be recognized, yet she remains cautious, aware of his fragile emotional state. Ethan's pain is raw, and she's concerned that any romantic developments between them may stem from his heartbreak rather than genuine feelings. Nonetheless, she continues to be his pillar, setting the stage for a complicated journey of emotional entanglement, heartbreak, and self-discovery. In the aftermath of his breakup, Ethan is left reeling. Maya becomes his source of solace, and he spends most of his time with her, seeking comfort and distraction. He's unable to confront his emotions head-on, choosing instead to immerse himself in Maya's comforting presence. Maya tries to remain grounded, but as Ethan begins to cross the boundaries of friendship, her hopes for something more rise, though she keeps them guarded. One night, their connection escalates. Ethan's emotional walls crumble, and in a vulnerable moment, he kisses Maya. What starts as a small gesture of affection quickly turns into a night of passion, leaving Maya with a surge of hope. She believes that perhaps their years of friendship are finally evolving into the relationship she's longed for. Ethan, feeling a temporary escape from his heartbreak, showers Maya with affection in the days following. But there's an underlying uncertainty in his actions that Maya senses but chooses to ignore. As their relationship unfolds, Maya struggles with mixed emotions. While she feels closer to Ethan than ever before, doubts creep into her mind. She wonders if she's merely a rebound, filling the void left by Sophia. Ethan, still emotionally bruised, shows glimpses of affection but frequently retreats into himself, leaving Maya to feel uncertain and anxious about their future. Their relationship is marked by moments of closeness, followed by awkward silences, a reflection of Ethan's unresolved feelings for Sophia. Despite the emotional highs, Maya becomes increasingly aware that she's living in a delicate balance. Her hope for a future with Ethan is tainted by the fear that his attachment to her is a temporary solution, one that could shatter if he's given the chance to reunite with Sophia. She realizes that she's taking a risk with her heart, yet she can't pull herself away, believing that their connection might deepen over time. Little does she know, Her fears are about to materialize in a painful way. Just when Maya starts to believe her relationship with Ethan could be real, Sophia returns, determined to make amends. Claiming to regret her actions, she professes that breaking up was a mistake. She insists she's changed, feeding Ethan the exact words he wants to hear. Ethan, still haunted by his lingering love for her, finds himself drawn back into her orbit. Despite the pain she caused him, his unresolved emotions flare up, creating an internal conflict that Maya can't ignore. Maya confronts Ethan, urging him to see Sophia's true nature and to remember the pain she caused. But Ethan, blinded by his love and unresolved feelings, feels hopeful that things could work out. He's convinced that he can rekindle their relationship and finally move forward. Maya is devastated, realizing that her worst fear has come true. She's nothing more than a temporary distraction for Ethan. Someone he leaned on in his time of need, but who he's willing to discard at the first sign of Sophia's interest. The situation forces Maya to face her own emotional boundaries. She understands that she's placed herself in a position where her own feelings are secondary, and Ethan's lack of regard for her emotions hurts deeply. Maya decides to step back, recognizing that she deserves someone who genuinely values her and sees her as more than a fallback option. Though it pains her, she accepts that her years of friendship and loyalty to Ethan cannot compete with the hold Sophia has over him. The emotional toll of Ethan's wavering becomes too much for Maya to bear. She realizes that by staying close to him, she's only allowing herself to be hurt repeatedly. She's forced to make a difficult decision, choosing to protect her heart rather than continue sacrificing it for someone who isn't fully present for her. The story reaches a poignant moment of self-respect as Maya steps away, leaving Ethan to face the consequences of his decisions alone. In a shocking twist, Maya learns that Sophia has become engaged, not to Ethan, but to his older brother, Liam. The revelation sends shockwaves through their social circle, especially for Ethan, who feels a new depth of betrayal. He's devastated by the idea that Sophia, who claimed to want a second chance, was simultaneously building a relationship with his own brother. The engagement announcement becomes blindsided by betrayal from both his ex-girlfriend and his brother, spirals into deeper emotional turmoil. He's forced to confront the reality that Sophia never truly cared for him in the way he thought. Maya, though hurt by her own experience with Ethan, sympathizes with him, knowing the pain of unrequited feelings and betrayal. She feels torn between offering him support as a friend and maintaining her own boundaries to avoid being hurt again. As Ethan faces the harsh truth, he begins to reflect on his actions and the way he treated Maya. He recognizes that in his obsession with Sophia, he neglected someone who truly cared about him. This realization marks a turning point for Ethan, who is forced to reckon with the emotional damage he's inflicted on those around him. Maya, however, has already started moving on, finding comfort in the knowledge that stepping away from Ethan was the right choice. Sophia's engagement to Liam pushes Ethan to his breaking point. He begins to isolate himself, falling into a state of despair. His obsession with Sophia, coupled with the betrayal from his brother, leads him into a downward spiral. Maya, empathetic as ever, attempts to be there for him, though her own heart remains guarded. She knows that Ethan's troubles are beyond her ability to heal, and she feels the weight of emotional exhaustion from their complicated history. Maya realizes that her self-worth is at stake. Ethan's inability to value her presence while still yearning for someone who continually hurt him has taken a toll on her emotionally. She decides to distance herself, understanding that she cannot allow herself to be drawn into his pain when he never fully appreciated her feelings. Her decision is a step toward reclaiming her independence and prioritizing her own well-being. Ethan, though initially resentful of her departure, eventually understands that Maya's decision to walk away is a consequence of his own choices. He begins to see the emotional burden he placed on her and regrets not recognizing her true worth sooner. He's left to confront his own actions, grappling with the loss of a friend who genuinely cared for him. Free from the emotional strain, Maya embarks on a journey of self-discovery. She reflects on her experience with Ethan and realizes that letting go was the healthiest choice. Through this painful experience, she learns the importance of setting boundaries and valuing her own needs. Eventually, Maya meets someone new, someone who values her for who she is, and she begins to open her heart once again, this time on her terms. Ethan, left to his own devices, starts attending therapy to unpack his unresolved feelings and understand his own patterns. He's forced to confront the fact that his pursuit of Sophia was a misguided attempt to fill a void within himself. Through therapy, he begins a journey of healing and growth, hoping to make amends for the pain he caused Maya, though he knows their relationship may never return to what it was. Sophia and Liam's marriage, while a source of pain for Ethan, serves as a constant reminder of the lessons he's learned. He understands the importance of genuine connections and regrets, not recognizing the value of Maya's friendship and loyalty sooner. Their complicated history becomes a valuable lesson. After distancing herself from Ethan, Maya finds herself navigating a new phase of her life, one focused on self-care and understanding her own emotional needs. Reflecting on her past relationship with Ethan, she recognizes that she had spent years prioritizing his happiness over her own. This realization is both painful and liberating. Maya begins to focus on her career, hobbies, and friendships, finding joy in simple things that remind her of her strength and resilience. Over time, Maya meets Daniel, a thoughtful and compassionate man who appreciates her for who she is. Unlike her relationship with Ethan, there are no hidden agendas or past heartbreaks clouding her judgment. With Daniel, Maya feels truly seen and valued. He respects her boundaries, listens to her, and is genuinely interested in her dreams and ambitions. Their connection grows organically, without the emotional turmoil she once endured. For the first time in a long while, Maya feels hopeful about the possibility of love that's built on mutual respect and shared values. Maya's journey of healing becomes an inspiration to her friends, who watch her transformation with admiration. She has come to terms with her past and has learned valuable lessons about self-worth, boundaries, and the importance of being with someone who genuinely values her. She occasionally hears updates about Ethan and Sophia through mutual friends, but she no longer feels the emotional sting of the past. Her focus is firmly on her own happiness and future, with the painful experience serving as a valuable lesson that she's grown from. Meanwhile, Ethan is forced to confront his behavior and the choices that led to his painful reality. The combined betrayal by Sophia and Liam pushes him into a period of self-reflection, where he begins to see how his obsession with Sophia and his disregard for Maya's feelings created his own undoing. With the help of therapy, he begins to understand his own emotional needs and insecurities, tracing back patterns of self-sabotage and learning how his actions affected others. Ethan's therapist helps him realize that his connection to Sophia was largely rooted in his own unresolved emotional wounds. By relying on Maya as a rebound and not appreciating her for the caring person she was, he failed to build a relationship based on genuine respect. As he delves into this self-examination, Ethan reaches out to Maya in an attempt to apologize, acknowledging the pain he caused her and expressing gratitude for the kindness she showed him when he didn't deserve it. Maya listens to Ethan's apology, appreciative of his effort to make amends. She offers him forgiveness, but she makes it clear that while she holds no resentment, she has moved on. Ethan respects her decision, realizing that Maya's growth and happiness are more important than his own desire for closure. This encounter becomes a turning point for him, helping him let go of the past and focus on building healthier relationships moving forward. Sophia and Liam's relationship faces its own set of challenges. Their engagement, once a source of excitement, is marred by lingering mistrust and doubts from those around them. Friends and family members question the sincerity of their relationship, given the way it began and the heartbreak it caused. Liam, although initially infatuated with Sophia, starts to realize the impact of his choices and the hurt he brought to his own brother. The guilt of this reality begins to weigh on him, especially as the initial thrill of the relationship fades and he's forced to confront the complexities of his involvement with Sophia. Sophia, too, begins to sense the repercussions of her actions. She sees how her decisions affected not just Ethan, but others in their circle, and realizes that her impulsive, self-centered approach to relationships has left her isolated from those who once supported her. While she and Liam proceed with their wedding plans, their relationship lacks the depth and mutual respect that Maya has found with Daniel. Sophia's actions catch up to her as she realizes that she's lost the respect of people around her, and her relationship with Liam, though intact, is fragile and built on a foundation of drama rather than genuine love. In the final moments of the story, Ethan and Maya's paths cross one last time at a mutual friend's event. They share a brief but heartfelt conversation, both of them changed by their experiences. Ethan wishes Maya well, genuinely happy to see her flourishing and content with Daniel. Maya, in turn, encourages Ethan to continue his journey of self-growth and to find happiness within himself before seeking it in others. As they part ways, Maya realizes how far she's come, from silently loving Ethan to finally letting go and finding a life where she is valued and respected. Ethan watches her leave, understanding that this chapter of his life has closed. He resolves to take the lessons he's learned and to move forward with a new sense of purpose and a commitment to forming healthy, respectful relationships. Maya's story ends on a hopeful note, with her future bright and filled with possibilities. She's left behind the heartache and pain, emerging as a stronger, wiser person. Ethan, too, is on his path to healing, no longer held captive by his mistakes, but rather transformed by them. Both characters are free to move on, wiser, and ready for what lies ahead, marking the end of a tumultuous chapter and the beginning of a new one. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this story and found it as engaging as we did. If you have thoughts, reactions, or similar stories of your own, please share them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories. See you in the next one.
It all began on a late afternoon as I was driving home from my parents' house. I had been there for several weeks, helping to finish a long-overdue renovation project. It was hard work, but satisfying in its own way. My hands were still sore from handling tools, and my mind was on getting home, having a hot meal, and finally putting my feet up. As I approached the driveway, something felt off. The usual calm of the neighborhood was replaced with faint sounds of chaos coming from inside my house. It wasn't clear what was going on, but it wasn't normal. I parked the car and stepped out, my senses heightened. As I entered the house, the noises became more distinct, thuds, scraping, and something that sounded like distant yelling. My first instinct was to ensure safety. I quickly moved to the drawer where I kept my pistol. A cautious man by nature, I believed in being prepared. With the gun firmly in hand, I took deliberate steps into the living room. What I saw there stopped me in my tracks. The place looked like a storm had passed through it. Furniture was pushed aside, wallpaper peeled off in strips, and the usual orderliness I maintained was completely gone. For a moment, I thought the house had been ransacked. "What is going on here?" I called out, my voice steady but firm. My wife appeared from the kitchen, looking oddly composed despite the destruction around her. She didn't seem alarmed at all, which was even more confusing. "There's a problem we need to fix," she began, as if this explanation would suffice. I lowered the pistol, still scanning the room. She pointed at the walls, gesturing to the torn wallpaper and scratched surfaces. "The house is in terrible shape," she said. "I decided it's time for a full renovation." Her tone was matter-of-fact, like she was talking about rearranging furniture, not tearing apart the entire house. "You decided?" I asked, my disbelief evident. "I just spent weeks finishing up a renovation at my parents' place, and now you're telling me I'm walking into another project." She nodded enthusiastically, as if this was exciting news. "But this isn't simple," I continued. "A renovation like this takes planning, money, and a proper team. It's not something I can just throw together on my own." "Relax," she said, brushing off my concerns. "I've already thought this through. We're meeting someone tomorrow who can handle everything." Her confidence was unsettling. I'm a man who believes in doing things right, not rushing into decisions. "Who exactly are we meeting?" I asked, my skepticism clear. "A friend of mine. Her husband is a professional. He handles renovations, designs, projects, the whole package," she explained. "Is he an engineer? Does he have a team?" I pressed, trying to gauge how legitimate this sounded. She rolled her eyes slightly, as if my questioning was unnecessary. "Yes, he has a team. He's done incredible work on my friend's house. You'll see for yourself. Don't worry about the details, they're all sorted." I wasn't entirely convinced. Renovations weren't just about skill, they were about trust and accountability. But she seemed adamant. "Tomorrow is your day off, isn't it?" she continued, shifting the conversation back to logistics. "We're meeting them first thing. It's an important meeting, so I need you to make a good impression." She said this with a sense of finality, as if the decision had already been made and my role was merely to follow through. I stared at the mess around me, feeling a mix of frustration and resignation. Whatever she had planned, it seemed I had little choice but to go along with it. At the very least, I'd see what this so-called professional had to offer. The next morning, we set off early, heading to a small town where my wife's friend lived. It was an unusually long drive, made worse by my growing apprehension. She had mentioned this friend before, though not in the most flattering terms. The woman had a reputation for being unreliable, someone who jumped from one relationship to another and didn't hesitate to throw others under the bus when it suited her. It baffled me why my wife thought it was a good idea to involve her in something as significant as our home renovation. When we arrived, the house was modest but well maintained. My wife rang the doorbell, and within moments, the door swung open. I recognized the woman instantly. She hadn't changed much since the last time I saw her, though there was something oddly subdued about her demeanor. Gone was the brazen attitude I remembered. She greeted us warmly, even cheerfully, as if she hadn't spent years cultivating a reputation for being difficult. My wife nudged me to step inside, though I hesitated, shooting her a look that said everything I was thinking. "She's different now," my wife whispered, rolling her eyes at my reluctance. I followed her inside, still skeptical. The woman led us to the living room, offering us coffee and asking us to make ourselves comfortable. It was bizarre. The last time I'd seen her, she wouldn't have thought twice about dismissing someone outright. Now, she was practically the picture of hospitality. I sat down but didn't relax, keeping my guard up. I wasn't about to let my past impressions cloud my judgment entirely, but I wasn't convinced of her supposed transformation either. As we waited, I turned to my wife. "Are you sure you want to trust her?" "She's not exactly known for reliability," I said quietly. My wife sighed, clearly exasperated. "People change," she said. "Ever since she got married, she's turned over a new leaf. Just wait and see." Her confidence annoyed me, but I decided to keep my thoughts to myself. It wasn't worth an argument, not yet, anyway. Soon after, her husband joined us. He was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with an air of authority about him. He greeted us politely and introduced himself. Despite my reservations about his wife, I couldn't deny that he seemed competent and professional. We began discussing the renovation project, and my wife wasted no time outlining her vision. She spoke enthusiastically about transforming our home, her excitement evident in every word. I mostly listened, occasionally chiming in with practical concerns about costs and timelines. The man nodded along, taking notes and asking relevant questions. He seemed to know his stuff, which was reassuring. "I'll bring my team over on Sunday to take a look at the house," he said. "We'll evaluate the scope of work and give you a detailed plan afterward." His confidence was contagious, even if I still had my doubts about the whole arrangement. My wife beamed, clearly thrilled that things were moving forward. I remained reserved, unwilling to get too optimistic until I saw results. As the conversation wrapped up, he added a final note. "Just a heads up," he said. "My team is unique. They're young guys, full of energy, and sometimes their behavior can be a bit, let's say, unorthodox. If they say or do anything that seems out of line, don't take it personally. They're good at what they do, and that's what matters." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. My wife seemed unbothered, nodding along as if it were a minor detail. We thanked them for their time and hospitality before heading back home. The drive felt shorter this time, but my mind was still racing. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. My wife, however, seemed perfectly at ease, already talking about how great everything would turn out. I kept my thoughts to myself, deciding to wait and see how Sunday's visit would unfold. The last day of my weekend began earlier than expected. I woke up to the sound of my wife tearing down wallpaper in the living room. She had been at it since dawn, the noise of ripping paper echoing through the house. Groaning, I rolled out of bed and realized I hadn't even had time to wash up when there was a sharp knock at the door. Still in my boxers, I quickly threw on some clothes and went to see who it was. What greeted me was nothing short of a spectacle. Standing on my porch was a group of young men, looking more like they belonged on a runway than at a renovation site. One of them, dressed in a beige designer suit, seemed to be the self-proclaimed leader. Behind him was a mix of casually dressed guys, each carrying an air of nonchalance. Before I could even get a word in, they barged in, their voices filling the space with loud chatter and crude jokes. Some of their remarks were directed at the state of the house, others at the torn wallpaper. It was enough to make my blood boil. "Hey, keep it professional," I snapped at one of them who had gone too far. My voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The leader quickly stepped in, apologizing on behalf of the group. "Don't mind them," he said with a sheepish smile. "They're just excited to get started." I didn't buy the excuse but decided not to escalate things further. Instead, I crossed my arms and waited for them to begin their assessment. The team spread out, examining every corner of the house with surprising efficiency. Despite their initial behavior, it was clear they knew what they were doing. My wife joined them, eagerly pointing out areas she wanted renovated. "Don't forget to check the basement," she said, her enthusiasm borderline contagious. I frowned. "Why the basement?" I asked. "It's just a storage space for junk." "What's the point?" She waved me off with a vague explanation about having special plans for the area, promising to share the details later. I didn't press her, but made a mental note to follow up. As the group moved downstairs, I stayed close behind, observing their every move. The basement, like I said, was cluttered with old boxes and forgotten items. Yet, the team seemed unfazed. They measured walls, checked the flooring, and even discussed potential layouts among themselves. Their professionalism in this moment was a stark contrast to their earlier antics. Still, I couldn't ignore the hushed conversations and occasional glances they exchanged. Something about it felt off, but I chose to let it slide for now. After thoroughly inspecting the house, they regrouped in the living room to discuss their findings. The leader presented their estimate, and I was genuinely surprised. The cost was far lower than I had anticipated. "Why so affordable?" I asked, skeptical of the offer. "We're not overhauling the structure," he explained. It's mostly cosmetic work, plus a few furniture upgrades. Nothing too complicated. His reasoning made sense, but I remained cautious. My wife, however, seemed thrilled. She nodded enthusiastically, agreeing to their terms without hesitation. Before we wrapped up, the leader added one final detail. Usually, we take payment upfront, he said. But since your wife is a friend of my wife, we'll handle the legalities and payments after the work is completed. Does that work for you? His offer was unexpected but intriguing. The idea of paying only after seeing results was appealing. It showed confidence in their ability to deliver, which I respected. After a brief pause, I extended my hand. All right, I said. You've got a deal. After that day, the renovation work began in earnest. Each morning, I left for work as usual, while my wife stayed home to oversee the progress. The team of builders arrived promptly and got to work, their noisy presence a constant reminder that the house was undergoing a transformation. Days turned into weeks, and I could see changes taking shape. The living room looked brighter, the kitchen more modern, and even the upstairs bedrooms began to feel refreshed. My wife seemed to thrive in her role as the on-site manager, keeping everything on schedule and making sure the workers stuck to the plan. One evening, I came home exhausted from a long day at the office. The house was quieter than usual. The workers had already packed up and left for the day, leaving behind a faint scent of sawdust and fresh paint. As I walked through the house, I couldn't help but notice how much progress had been made. However, my thoughts kept circling back to one thing, the basement. I had completely forgotten about my wife's earlier mention of wanting to renovate it. It wasn't until I saw a stack of materials by the basement door that I remembered. Curious, I called out to her. She appeared moments later, still holding a clipboard filled with notes. What's the deal with the basement? I asked. Why are we even bothering with it? It's just a place for storing junk. She smiled, clearly anticipating the question. I've got big plans for that space, she said, her voice filled with excitement. Think about it, we've been using it as a dumping ground, but it has so much potential. I want to turn it into a special area, something unique. I raised an eyebrow. Special how? She launched into a description of her vision, painting a picture of cozy furniture, an enormous bookshelf, and mood lighting in rich, warm tones. It'll be a perfect retreat, she said. A place where we can relax, read, or even entertain guests. It sounded ambitious, almost too ambitious. And you're sure this is worth the effort? I asked. She nodded confidently. Absolutely. But to make it happen, I need to take care of a few details with someone who's helping me finalize the design. That caught my attention. Who are you meeting? I asked, narrowing my eyes slightly. Just someone who's helping me bring the idea to life, she replied vaguely. Don't worry about it. It's all under control. Her nonchalant attitude didn't sit entirely well with me, but I decided not to push. She had been managing the project competently so far, and I didn't want to micromanage. So, when do I get to see this masterpiece? I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She laughed. Soon enough, she said. But for now, I need you to handle something important. Tomorrow, the builders will be back to start working on the basement. I have a meeting in the afternoon and might be late. Can you keep an eye on things while I'm gone? I hesitated for a moment, considering her request. Supervising the workers wasn't exactly how I wanted to spend my evening, but it seemed reasonable enough. All right, I said. I'll make sure everything runs smoothly. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before heading back to her notes. That night, as I sat in the living room, I couldn't help but think about the project. The house was shaping up nicely, and while I had my reservations about the basement, I trusted her judgment. For now, my focus was on making sure the workers did their job properly. Whatever she had planned for the space, I'd find out soon enough. The next day, I got up early, ready to take on the task. As my wife prepared to leave for her meeting, she reminded me once again. Keep an eye on them, she said. They're good, but they need supervision. I nodded, determined to do my part. Whatever her grand vision for the basement was, I'd make sure it started on the right foot. The next day, I arrived home after a long shift at work. The house was quiet, just as my wife had warned me it would be. She was out, and the builders had already arrived to continue their work on the basement. As I stepped inside, I could hear voices from downstairs. At first, I thought nothing of it, just the usual noise of people talking on the job. But then, I caught fragments of their conversation, and what I heard made my blood run cold. They weren't discussing work. Their words were vulgar and laced with inappropriate remarks about my wife. The kind of talk that no man would tolerate about someone he cared for. At that moment, any sense of patience I had left evaporated. Without hesitation, I made my way downstairs. The group fell silent as I entered, clearly caught off guard by my sudden presence. I walked straight up to one of them, a young guy with a cocky demeanor who seemed to be the ringleader of their crude jokes. Grabbing him by the collar, I lifted him just enough to make my point clear. "You want to repeat that?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with unmistakable anger. His face went pale, and he stammered, "Man, you must have misheard. We weren't talking about your wife. It's just someone with the same name, that's all." I let him go, but my glare lingered. "Watch your mouth," I said firmly. "Next time, there won't be a warning." The room was tense as I turned and walked away. I didn't need to say more, they got the message. As I headed back upstairs, I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't care. Respect was non-negotiable. Later that evening, my wife returned home, looking as cheerful as ever. She immediately began talking about the progress the builders had made, oblivious to the confrontation that had taken place earlier. I interrupted her to explain what had happened, recounting the incident in detail. Her reaction was a mix of frustration and exasperation. "Why is it that every time I leave you alone, you end up in some kind of standoff?" she asked, rolling her eyes. "And what was I supposed to do?" I shot back. "Let them talk like that without consequence." She sighed. "No, but maybe next time, handle it a bit more diplomatically. We still need these guys to finish the job. The last thing I want is for them to sabotage the work out of spite." I understood her point, but I wasn't about to apologize for defending her honor. "Fine," I said, "but they're on thin ice as far as I'm concerned." After dinner, she changed the subject, her tone lightening as she shared some news. "By the way," she said, "I spoke to the husband of my friend earlier. He mentioned the incident and asked if everything was okay. I assured him it's under control, but it looks like the builders might have said something to him, too." I wasn't surprised. Gossip traveled fast in situations like these. Still, I was glad the matter hadn't escalated further. Before heading to bed, she mentioned another update about the project. "So, there's someone coming in a few days," she began. "He's going to help with a graphic visualization of what the basement will look like. Apparently, he's an expert, but also unique." She gave me a knowing look, as if preparing me for someone eccentric. "Just a heads up so you're not caught off guard." I nodded, taking her words in stride. At this point, nothing about this renovation could surprise me. "All right," I said. "Let's see what this guy has to offer." Another weekend rolled around, and I was at home trying to catch up on some much-needed rest. My wife had been out for most of the morning, running errands for the renovation project. When she finally returned, she wasn't alone. She walked in with a man who, to put it mildly, was unlike anyone I'd ever seen. He was covered in tattoos, with piercings in places I didn't even think were possible. His style was loud, almost deliberately provocative, and it immediately set the tone for what was going to be a very unusual interaction. The man introduced himself with an overly casual demeanor, extending a hand as if we'd been friends for years. "Your wife's told me about the basement project," he said, his voice dripping with enthusiasm. "So, have you heard the full plan yet?" I shook his hand reluctantly and replied, "Not entirely." My wife stood nearby, watching with a mix of amusement and anticipation as he led the way down to the basement. Once downstairs, he pulled out a high-end tablet and began taking pictures of the space from every angle. His movements were quick and efficient, clearly practiced. "All right, let me show you what I've got in mind," he said, pulling up a digital sketchpad on the screen. Within minutes, he had drawn a detailed layout of the room. He pointed to one corner. "Here, we'll install a custom-designed intimate chair." Then, moving to the opposite side, he added, "And over here, a large crossfall, well, you get the idea." I froze, staring at him in disbelief. "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "What is this supposed to be?" He looked at me as if I'd just asked a silly question. "It's an intimate space," he said matter-of-factly. "Your wife was very clear about wanting something unique, something liberating." His explanation didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. I turned to my wife, who was standing silently, watching my reaction with a sheepish smile. "Is this true?" I asked her, trying to keep my composure. She shrugged. "Why not?" she said. "I thought it'd be something fun, something different. I'm doing this for us, you know. To spice things up a bit." Her nonchalant attitude only added to my frustration. "I thought this was supposed to be a cozy reading room," I said. "You know, bookshelves, a couch, something simple and comfortable. This is not what I had in mind." She stepped closer, her tone softening. "Look," she said. "You've been working so hard, and I just wanted to do something special for us. It's not like it's set in stone. If you really don't want it, we can rethink the design." Her attempt to pacify me was partially effective. I sighed, deciding it wasn't worth a fight. "Fine," I said. "But let's keep it reasonable. No surprises." The man wrapped up his presentation quickly after that, sensing the tension in the room. As he packed up his things, he complimented my wife on her vision and assured her the final design would be perfect. I wasn't convinced, but I kept my opinions to myself. As he left, my wife walked him to the door, thanking him for his time and effort. When she returned, she brought up another topic. "By the way," she said, "the lead builder wants to talk to you about something important. He's stopping by tomorrow. I'm not sure what it's about, but he said it's crucial." I raised an eyebrow, curious, but not overly concerned. "All right," I said. "We'll see what he has to say." It was another long day at work when I got home to find the lead builder waiting for me. His expression was serious, and I could tell right away that something wasn't right. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside. Without wasting time, he laid it out plainly. The costs for the basement renovation had spiraled beyond the original estimate. "Your wife updated the project," he explained, "and it's a lot more extensive now. Unfortunately, this means the total cost is significantly higher than we initially discussed." He named the figure, and I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process the number. Before I could respond, my wife appeared in the doorway. Her face was a mix of worry and determination. She must have overheard the conversation because she immediately began pleading her case. "Look, I know it's more than we planned," she said, "but just think about how amazing it's going to be when it's finished. We're already halfway there. The living room and kitchen are practically done. This is the home we've always dreamed of." I raised a hand to stop her. "Let me think," I said firmly. Turning to the builder, I added, "Can we pause the construction for a couple of days? I need time to figure out how we're going to handle this." He nodded, understanding my position. "No problem," he said. "We'll hold off until you're ready." With that, he left, leaving me and my wife to sort through the mess. Once we were alone, she started again. "Please," she said, her voice soft and almost pleading. "I know it's a lot, but just imagine how beautiful it will be. This is for us, for our future. We've already come so far. If we stop now, all this work will be for nothing." I could see the hope in her eyes, but her words only added to my frustration. "You do realize," I said, that I'm the one paying for all of this? It's my job that's funding your dream house, not yours." She didn't back down. If anything, she doubled down, painting a picture of how perfect everything would be once the renovations were complete. "You're always saying you want a comfortable home to come back to," she argued. "This is it. This is our chance to make that happen. Don't you think it's worth the extra effort?" Her persistence was exhausting, but she wasn't wrong. The renovations were already underway, and stopping now would mean wasting all the time and money we'd already invested. That night, I stayed up late, running the numbers in my head and considering my options. By morning, I had made up my mind. If we were going to push forward with this, I needed a way to bring in more income to cover the additional costs. At work, I approached my supervisor to discuss opportunities for extra assignments or projects. To my surprise, he had an immediate suggestion. "There's a week-long business trip coming up," he said. "It's not glamorous, but the pay is triple the usual rate. If you're interested, it's yours." The decision wasn't difficult. A week away from home would be inconvenient, but the financial benefit was too good to pass up. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. Arrangements were quickly made, and I left the office feeling a mix of relief and determination. At least now, I had a plan to tackle the mounting expenses. When I got home, I sat my wife down to explain the situation. "I found a way to make this work," I told her. "I'm taking on a short-term assignment that'll bring in the extra money we need. It means I'll be away for a week, but it'll cover the costs of the new project." Her face lit up with relief and excitement. "Thank you," she said, throwing her arms around me. "I promise you won't regret this." For the first time in days, I felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. The day finally came when the renovation team was scheduled to return to continue their work. I got home from the office later than usual, tired and ready to relax, but what greeted me left me both puzzled and annoyed. The builders were scattered around the house, some shirtless, others wearing shorts so short they might as well have been underwear. I stared for a moment, trying to make sense of the scene, before heading inside to find my wife. "What's going on?" I asked her, gesturing toward the half-dressed workers. She didn't seem fazed. "Oh, they said it's too hot to work in full clothes," she explained casually. "I told them it's fine as long as they're getting the job done." "What's the harm?" Her tone was light, almost dismissive, but it only made my discomfort grow. This wasn't the kind of environment I wanted in my home. I decided not to argue, though the situation nagged at me. It felt like one more thing in a growing list of oddities surrounding this renovation. Instead, I focused on what I needed to share with her. "By the way," I said, "I got confirmation about my work trip. I'll be leaving in a week and gone for about 4 days. She nodded, seemingly unbothered. "That's perfect timing," she said. "By then, the basement should be nearly finished. All that'll be left is installing the furniture." The week went by faster than I expected. The builders continued their work, and I busied myself preparing for the trip. On the day of my departure, I gave my wife a quick rundown of what she might need to handle while I was gone. She assured me everything would be fine, and I left, trying to push aside the lingering unease I felt about the project. For the first couple of days, things seemed normal enough. I checked in with her a few times, but our conversations were brief. She seemed distracted, and then, by the third day, she stopped answering her phone altogether. Initially, I chalked it up to her being busy with the builders or other errands. But by the evening, my frustration had turned into concern. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, as if on cue, my phone rang. It was my neighbor. "Hey," he said, his tone cautious. "I know you're out of town, but I thought you should know something. Your wife mentioned the renovation, right?" I confirmed, wondering where this was going. "Well," he continued, "I've noticed something odd. Usually, the workers leave in the evening, but for the past 3 nights, their trucks have been parked outside late into the night. I thought maybe they were just working overtime, but considering, the argument you had with them, I figured it's worth mentioning." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced as I tried to process what he was saying. "You're sure about this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rising anger. He assured me he was. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," he added, but it seemed strange. "I thought you'd want to know." After the call ended, I sat there in silence, my thoughts spiraling. Everything started to click: my wife's distracted behavior, the missed calls, and now this. It was too much to ignore. I needed to get back home and find out what was really going on. Without wasting a moment, I began planning how to cut my trip short and return earlier than expected. Whatever was happening, I wasn't going to sit idly by and let it continue unchecked. The next morning, my wife called me, her tone cheerful and upbeat. "The furniture has arrived," she said. "There's not much left to do now." I told her I'd be home a day or two later than expected, blaming work for the delay. "That's fine," she replied. "Everything should be finished by then." Her casual response didn't ease my growing suspicion, but I kept my thoughts to myself. The moment the call ended, I started making plans to return home earlier than she expected. I wrapped up my work commitments as quickly as possible and drove home that same evening. When I pulled up to the house, the builders' trucks were still parked outside. It was late, far past the usual hours they worked. My unease deepened as I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in, moving quietly through the entryway. Near the basement door, I noticed a strange puddle of liquid on the floor. It didn't look like water, and I couldn't immediately place what it was. My instincts told me to stay cautious. Slowly, I descended the basement stairs, careful not to make any noise. What I saw when I reached the bottom was beyond anything I could have imagined. My wife, along with the builders, was caught in an act that left no room for misinterpretation. For a moment, I simply stood there, frozen in shock. Then, I pulled out my phone and began recording. None of them noticed me, too engrossed in their actions to sense my presence. Once I had enough footage, I turned and walked back upstairs, my mind racing. Anger surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I came up with a plan. I locked the basement door from the outside, securing it with the key. Then, I left the key in the lock, ensuring they couldn't open it from their side. For the next few hours, the house was eerily quiet. But eventually, the banging started. Fists pounded on the basement door, followed by muffled shouts. The door stuck, someone yelled. "What's going on?" Their panic grew as time passed. I sat in the living room, waiting, my mind already planning my next move. When the noise from the basement reached a fever pitch, I walked to the hallway and called out. "The door's not stuck," I said loudly enough for them to hear. "It's locked." "You're not going anywhere." Their protests grew louder, but I ignored them. Instead, I gathered all the clothes they had left in the living room and threw them into the garbage bin outside. They wouldn't be needing them anytime soon. The next day, after a full 24 hours of leaving them locked up, I called the police. "There are intruders in my house," I told the dispatcher. "I caught them in the act and locked them in the basement. Can you send someone over?" When the officers arrived, I unlocked the basement door and stepped aside as they entered. The builders and my wife scrambled out, looking disheveled and desperate. The builders immediately started shouting accusations. "He locked us in," one of them said. "We're the crew working on his house." "He's lying." I calmly countered their claims. "I just got back from a business trip," I explained to the officers. "If you don't believe me, you can confirm my alibi with my boss and my neighbor. They'll tell you when I returned." The officers made their calls, and my story checked out. Meanwhile, the builders fumbled, unable to produce any contract or documentation proving they had a legitimate reason to be in my house. By the end of the ordeal, the police escorted the builders off the property. My wife and I were left alone in the aftermath. She stood there, avoiding my gaze, knowing there was no way to explain or justify what had happened. The silence between us was deafening, and the weight of her betrayal hung heavy in the air. As soon as the police left and the door closed, the tension in the house reached its breaking point. My wife, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "How could you do that?" she demanded, her voice sharp and filled with anger. "Locking them in the basement? Calling the police? Do you even realize what you've done?" Her words were accusatory, as if she were the one who had been wronged. I didn't flinch. "What I did?" I shot back. "You're questioning my actions when you're the one who betrayed me. Don't you dare try to turn this around. You have no right." My voice was steady, but my anger simmered beneath the surface. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to speak. Not after what you've done." She tried to defend herself, her tone becoming desperate. "It wasn't what it looked like," she began, but I wasn't having it. "Save it," I said coldly. "I don't want your excuses. There's nothing you can say that will undo what I saw." "Nothing." She fell silent, realizing that her words would carry no weight with me. Without another word, I walked past her and headed to the bedroom. I grabbed a suitcase and began pulling her clothes from the closet, tossing them in without care. "What are you doing?" she cried, following me. "Stop. You can't just throw me out like this." Her voice rose in pitch, but I didn't stop. The betrayal was too fresh, too deep. There was no room for reconciliation in my mind. "Watch me," I said bluntly, continuing to pack her belongings. She tried to grab the suitcase from me, but I pulled it away. "You're leaving," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm not staying in this house with you for another second. You've crossed the line, and there's no coming back from this." She began to cry, not out of remorse but frustration. "You don't have the right to do this," she screamed. "This is my home too." I turned to face her, my expression hardened. "No," I said. "It's not. I paid for this house. I've spent months working my ass off to turn it into something we could both enjoy. And you've done nothing but betray that effort. So, no, you don't get to stay." She tried to argue, her words coming out in a jumbled mess of anger and desperation, but I wasn't listening anymore. I zipped up the suitcase and pushed it toward the door. "Take it and go," I said firmly. "You're not welcome here anymore." She stood there, stunned, as if she couldn't believe I was serious. But when I opened the door and stepped aside, the reality of the situation finally hit her. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "You can't just get rid of me like this. I'll fight you for everything." I shook my head. "Do what you want," I said. "But this marriage is over. You're getting out of my house, and you're not coming back. Now leave." Her protests continued, but they fell on deaf ears as I guided her out the door and closed it behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was also a relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control over my life again. A few days after everything had seemingly settled, the construction crew showed up at my doorstep. Their faces were a mix of smugness and feigned professionalism. "We're here to talk about payment," the leader said, his tone carrying a hint of menace. "You owe us for the work we've done." I stared at them for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then, with a calm voice, I replied, "You mean payment for betrayal? Sure, I've got something for you." Without waiting for a response, I walked into the house, grabbed the trash bin that had been sitting by the back door, and returned to the window overlooking where they stood. Their expressions changed to confusion as I hoisted the bin and dumped its contents out the window, letting garbage rain down on them. "There's your payment," I said coldly. "Now get off my property." Their shock quickly turned to anger. "You'll regret this," one of them shouted, shaking his fist. "You better watch your back." I didn't flinch. Instead, I closed the window and walked away, refusing to engage further. Their threats were empty words to me at that moment, but little did I know how far they'd be willing to go. Over the next few days, I focused on legal matters, consulting with my lawyer to ensure everything was in order. Divorce proceedings were already underway, and I wanted to make sure I was protected from any additional fallout from the renovation debacle. My lawyer assured me that I was on solid ground, especially since there were no formal contracts with the crew. But the builders weren't done. Late one night, my neighbor called me, sounding alarmed. "I think something's going on near your house," he said. "There's a couple of guys near your car with what looks like a gas can." My heart sank as I quickly checked the security feed on my phone. Sure enough, two figures were lurking near the driveway, their movement suspicious. I called the police immediately, explaining the situation. As I waited for them to arrive, I stayed inside, watching through the window as the men began dousing my car with gasoline. They were sloppy, their movements rushed and panicked. It was clear they had no experience with this kind of thing. Within minutes, the flashing lights of a police car illuminated the street, and the two men froze like deer caught in headlights. The officers apprehended them on the spot. As they were handcuffed and led away, I stepped outside to watch. One of the men tried to plead his case. "It wasn't what it looked like," he said, "but the evidence was clear. The gas can, the matches in his pocket, and the security footage I provided left no room for doubt." At the station, their stories fell apart quickly under questioning. What started as a petty act of revenge escalated into a serious charge. This time, there were no excuses, no loopholes to exploit. The police informed me that the men were being charged with attempted arson, a crime that carried significant consequences. Unlike their first brush with the law, this incident ensured they wouldn't be walking away so easily. The day of the divorce proceedings came faster than I had expected, but I was ready. Armed with undeniable evidence of her betrayal, the process was swift and decisive. The judge reviewed the documentation I provided, including the video footage and statements from witnesses, and ruled in my favor. My wife's arguments, weak and unconvincing, were dismissed without much consideration. By the end of the hearing, I walked out of the courtroom knowing that the chapter of my life with her was officially over. With the divorce finalized, I turned my focus back to the house. The renovations had been tainted by the events surrounding them, but I refused to let that ruin my plans. Calling on a few close friends, I decided to finish the work myself. Over the course of several weekends, we repainted the walls, fixed the remaining issues, and restored order to the home. It was hard work, but it felt good to reclaim the space on my own terms. The basement, however, required a different approach. I couldn't look at it without being reminded of everything that had happened. So, I stripped it bare, removing all traces of the so-called intimate space my wife had envisioned. Instead of turning it into anything elaborate, I decided to use it for storage. Old boxes, tools, and seasonal decorations now occupied the space. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, and more importantly, it was mine. One of the first changes I made after the divorce was to replace all the locks in the house. The property was legally mine, a fact that the court had affirmed during the proceedings. My wife hadn't contributed a single penny to the purchase or renovation of the home. It was my hard work that had paid for everything, and I wasn't about to let her have any claim to it now. Changing the locks felt symbolic, a way of closing the door on the past and securing a new beginning. Life slowly began to settle into a new normal. Without the constant drama and tension, I found peace in the small things. I took up hobbies I had neglected, spent more time with friends, and focused on my work. The house, once a source of stress and conflict, became a haven. It was quiet, organized, and finally felt like a place I could truly call home. Then, one day, she showed up. My ex-wife stood on the porch, her expression a mix of desperation and regret. She begged me to take her back, promising that things would be different this time. I listened without interrupting, letting her say her piece. When she was finished, I looked her in the eye and said firmly, "No. You made your choices, and I've made mine. This door is closed." She left, tears in her eyes, and I felt no remorse. My decision was final. She eventually moved in with her parents, where I heard she'd been staying ever since. We had no further contact after that day. I didn't block her number or go out of my way to avoid her, but there was no reason for our paths to cross again. I had moved on, and so, it seemed, had she. The chapter was closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. In the end, life turned out well for me. The house stood as a testament to my resilience, a place where I could build new memories and leave the past behind. My ex-wife's absence became a distant memory, and the peace that followed her departure was more than enough. The story had reached its conclusion, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.
Hey, welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got a brand new story lined up for you today, and we're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Alfred Farrell stood at the kitchen sink, his weathered 40-year-old hands methodically washing dishes. 15 years as a postal worker had given him an appreciation for routine, but lately, something fell off. His wife Hope's sudden obsession with her appearance hadn't gone unnoticed. New clothes, a different hairstyle, hours spent primping in front of the mirror. At first, Alfred had been flattered, thinking perhaps she was making an effort for him. But as the weeks wore on, a gnawing suspicion took root in his gut. The sound of Hope's muffled giggles drifted from the living room, grating on his nerves like sandpaper. He dried his hands and padded quietly towards the source of the sound. Hope was sprawled on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, a secretive smile playing on her lips. As he entered, she startled, sitting up abruptly. "Oh, I've got to go," she said hurriedly into the phone. "Talk to you later, Beth." Alfred raised an eyebrow. "Beth from your book club?" Hope nodded, a touch too enthusiastically. "Yes, we were just discussing our latest read. You know how we get carried away." He did know. He also knew that Hope's book club met on Tuesdays, and it was Curly Thursday. But he said nothing, merely grunting in acknowledgement before retreating to the laundry room. As he sorted through the clothes, his hand brushed against Hope's purse. A slip of paper fell out, a receipt. Alfred's eyes widened as he read the itemized list. La Perla, $300 for a scrap of lace he'd never seen. The gnawing in his gut intensified. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep, Alfred lay awake, his mind racing. He thought about the 15 years they'd been married, the routines they'd settled into, the comfortable silences that had once felt like home but now seemed to stretch between them like a chasm. He made a decision. The next day, while Hope was at work, Alfred installed a discreet GPS tracker on her car. It was a simple device, easily hidden beneath the passenger seat. As he activated it, a wave of guilt washed over him. This wasn't who he was. He'd been a Boy Scout for Christ's sake. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Over the next week, Alfred watched as the little blinking that represented Hope's car made frequent trips to the Sunset Motel across town. Each time, his heart sank a little lower. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in years. His supervisor, Dave, seemed concerned. "You all right, Farrell? You never take time off." "Just a bug," Alfred lied smoothly. "I'll be back tomorrow. Good as new." As soon as Hope left for work, Alfred followed at a discreet distance. His palms were sweaty on the steering wheel as he watched her pull into the Sunset Motel parking lot. He parked across the street, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. And then he saw him, Justin Hendricks, the popular local radio DJ and Hope's co-worker. Alfred had met him once at a company picnic. Charming, funny, with a voice like melted chocolate. Everything Alfred wasn't, he watched, feeling like he was having an out-of-body experience, as Hope practically ran into Justin's arms. Their lips met in a passionate kiss that made Alfred's stomach turn. With shaking hands, he raised his phone and snapped a few photos. Evidence. That's what he needed now. As he lowered the phone, his eyes met Justin's across the parking lot. For a split second, recognition flashed in the other man's eyes. Then Hope pulled him into the motel room, and the door slammed shut. Alfred sat in his car for a long time after that, staring at nothing. He felt hollow-gutted. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A cold, calculating anger that surprised him with its intensity. His mind was already formulating a plan. Over the next few weeks, Alfred maintained a convincing facade of normalcy at home. He smiled at Hope over breakfast, asked about her day, and even surprised her with flowers one evening. All the while, he was meticulously gathering evidence. His first stop was the Sunset Motel. Sam, the owner, was a chatty man in his 60s who seemed flattered by Alfred's attention. Alfred spun a tale about writing a novel about small-town life, and Sam was more than happy to regale him with stories about the motel's colorful history. "You must see all sorts here," Alfred said casually one afternoon, leaning against the front desk. Sam chuckled. "Oh, you wouldn't believe the half of it. Affairs, mostly. People thinking they're being so clever, but it's always the same story." Alfred's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "I bet you have some security measures in place, though, for insurance purposes, if nothing else." Sam nodded towards a camera in the corner of the lobby. "Just the one there. Records everything that happens in this lobby." Alfred's eyes gleamed. "Fascinating. Mind if I take a look at how it's set up? For the book, you know." Sam hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Why not? Come on back." In the small office behind the front desk, Sam showed Alfred the ancient computer that served as a motel security system. It didn't take much for Alfred to convince Sam to let him study it for his novel. Once alone, Alfred's fingers flew over the keyboard. He may have been a postal worker, but he'd picked up some IT skills during his stint in the military. Within minutes, he had access to months of security footage. He found what he was looking for almost immediately: Hope and Justin entering and leaving the motel at regular intervals. Sometimes they looked furtive, glancing around nervously. Other times they were so wrapped up in each other they might as well have been alone in the world. Alfred copied the relevant footage onto a flash drive, his face impassive. When Sam returned, Alfred was leaning back in the chair, a pleasant smile on his face. "Find what you needed?" Sam asked. Alfred nodded. "Oh, yes. Very enlightening. Thank you, Sam." Back at home, Alfred turned his attention to Hope's email. She'd always been careless with her passwords, using the same one for everything: their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on Alfred, as he easily gained access to her account. What he found made his blood run cold. Months of intimate exchanges between Hope and Justin, plans for their rendezvous, declarations of passion, and worst of all, lies about working overtime at the radio station to meet Justin. Alfred read every single email, saving copies to an external hard drive. By the time he was done, it was well past midnight. He heard Hope stirring upstairs and quickly shut down the computer. As he climbed into bed beside her, Hope mumbled sleepily, "Everything okay? You were up late." Alfred forced a smile. "Just catching up on some work." "Go back to sleep, honey." Hope snuggled closer to him, and Alfred lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the vows they'd made, the life they'd built together, all of it based on a foundation of lies. In that moment, something inside Alfred hardened. The pain was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was overshadowed by a cold, calculating anger. He reached for the bedside table, pulling out a small notebook. In the dim light of the alarm clock, he began to write. Every detail of Hope's betrayal, every piece of evidence he'd gathered, it would become his journal, a record of his emotional journey. And though he didn't know it yet, it would become crucial to his plan. The next morning, Alfred called his supervisor at the post office. "Dave, it's Alfred. I need to take a week off. Family emergency out of state." Dave sounded concerned. "Everything all right, Farrell? This isn't like you." Alfred forced a note of worry into his voice. "My sister's in the hospital. Nothing too serious. But I need to be there. You understand, right? Of course, of course. Take all the time you need. With that taken care of, Alfred set his plan in motion. His first stop was a small, cash-only apartment across town. The landlord didn't ask questions when Alfred handed over 3 months' rent in cash, using the name Nick Buford. Next, he visited a graphic designer in the next town over. The young woman looked skeptical when Alfred explained what he wanted. A life-size promotional poster for a surprise anniversary party. Alfred nodded, his face a mask of enthusiasm. My wife's always wanted to be a movie star. I thought it would be fun to make her the star of her own movie poster. He handed over the photos he'd taken of Hope and Justin outside the motel. The designer's eyebrows rose, but she took the job, agreeing to create a life-size design. Back in town, Alfred made a stop at the home of Marissa, a mutual friend of his and Hope's. She was delighted to see him. Alfred, what a nice surprise. Come in. Over coffee, Alfred spun a tale about planning surprise parties for both Hope and Justin. I was hoping you might have spare keys to their houses, he said casually. You know, for decorating and such. Marissa hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Oh, why not? It's for a good cause, after all. As he left Marissa's house, keys to both Hope and Justin's homes in hand, Alfred felt a twinge of guilt. He'd never been a good liar before, but he was learning fast. That evening, as Hope chatted about her day over dinner, Alfred nodded and smiled in all the right places, but his mind was elsewhere, running through the logistics of his plan. He had learned that morning that there were budget cuts coming at work. His job might be on the line. It added a sense of urgency to his actions. After dinner, while Hope was engrossed in her favorite TV show, Alfred slipped down to the basement. He powered up his computer and began researching divorce laws. Property division, alimony, grounds for divorce. He took meticulous notes. Then he turned his attention to his personal assets, investments, savings accounts, their joint checking account. He began the process of liquidating what he could, moving money around in a complex shell game. As he worked, Alfred felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control. Hope might have betrayed him, but he would have the last laugh. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. He could hear Hope moving around upstairs, probably wondering where he was. For a moment, he considered going up, playing the role of devoted husband one more time. Instead, he turned back to his computer. He had work to do, preparing for all contingencies. The night air was thick with anticipation as Alfred Farrell crouched in the shadows outside the WKRP radio station. His heart hammered against his ribs, a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of his watch. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until the cleaning crew's shift change. 15 minutes until he set his plan in motion. He adjusted the backpack slung over his shoulder, feeling the weight of the rolled-up poster inside. The life-size image of Hope and Justin, caught in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel, felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. And Alfred was about to light the fuse. As the last of the cleaning staff trickled out of the building, Alfred made his move. He slipped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. The security guard was doing his rounds on the upper floors. Alfred had memorized the schedule over the past week. He had exactly 7 minutes before the guard returned. With practiced efficiency, Alfred unrolled the poster and began hanging it in the center of the main lobby. His hand shook slightly as he smoothed out the creases, revealing the damning image inch by inch. Hope's face, frozen in ecstasy. Justin's hands, possessive and hungry. It was obscene. It was perfect. Stepping back, Alfred surveyed his handiwork. The poster dominated the space, impossible to miss. But something was missing. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a can of red spray paint. In bold, dripping letters, he wrote beneath the image, "We know what you did." The words seemed to pulse in the dim light, accusing and final. Alfred allowed himself a grim smile. Let them try to explain this away. With 2 minutes to spare, he retreated to a hidden alcove and pulled out his laptop. His fingers flew over the keys as he hacked into the station's email server. One by one, messages pinged out to every employee, from the lowliest intern to the station manager himself. The subject line read, "New art installation in the lobby, don't miss it." As he heard the elevator ding, signaling the guard's return, Alfred slipped out a side exit. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. Phase 1 complete. He drove to the hotel he'd booked near his fictional sister's house, his alibi secured. As he checked in, he made a show of looking haggard and worried, playing the part of the concerned brother to perfection. "Room service, please," he told the sympathetic desk clerk. "I've been on the road all day visiting my sick sister. I am exhausted." Once in his room, Alfred set up his laptop and connected to the station's security cameras. He'd planted a back door in their system weeks ago, and now it gave him a front-row seat to the chaos that was about to unfold. He settled back against the headboard, a glass of whiskey in hand. On the screen, the night guard was making his final rounds. Any minute now, he would turn the corner and come face to face with Alfred's handiwork. Alfred raised his glass in a silent toast. "Showtime," he murmured. Hope Farrell hummed to herself as she applied her lipstick, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. She'd woken up to an empty bed, Alfred having left early for work, or so she thought. Her phone buzzed with a text from Justin. "Can't wait to see you at the charity event tonight. You're going to knock them dead in that new dress." Hope smiled, a mixture of excitement and guilt twisting in her stomach. She pushed the guilt aside, as she had been doing for months now. Alfred would never know. He was too trusting, too caught up in his own routine to notice what was happening right under his nose. As she left the house, Hope never noticed the figure watching from across the street. Alfred waited until her car had turned the corner before making his move. He entered the house, their house, with the spare key he'd never returned. For a moment, he stood in the entryway, memories washing over him. Their first night here, carrying Hope over the threshold. Christmases, birthdays, lazy Sunday mornings, all tainted now. Alfred shook off the nostalgia and got to work. He moved through the rooms like a whirlwind, methodically creating chaos. He overturned drawers, scattered papers, smashed picture frames. But it wasn't random destruction. No! Every move was calculated. He focused on Hope's belongings and their shared spaces, leaving his own things largely untouched. A message hidden in the mayhem. This was about her, not him. As he worked, Alfred planted tiny cameras throughout the house. In the bedroom, the kitchen, the living room. Each one carefully hidden, ready to capture Hope's reaction when she returned home. In the study, Alfred paused. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The words flowed easily, all the pain and betrayal of the past months pouring onto the page. When he was done, he read it over. "Hope, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know about Justin. I know about the Sunset Motel. I know about the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. Every moment, every touch, every whispered promise. I know it all. Did you think I was too stupid to notice? Too blind to see what was happening right in front of me? I may be just a simple postal worker, but I'm not a fool. I've taken what's mine. Don't bother looking for me. Don't bother trying to explain. There's nothing left to say. Goodbye. Hope. I hope it was worth it. Alfred." He folded the letter and placed it on Hope's pillow, a landmine waiting to be triggered. Before leaving, Alfred gathered up the important documents he'd need: birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. He also took a few sentimental items. His grandfather's watch, the baseball signed by his childhood hero, the photo album from their honeymoon. Let Hope wonder why these specific things were missing. As a final touch, Alfred picked up the phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he disguised his voice, pitching it higher and adding a tremor of fear. "Please, you have to help. I just saw someone breaking into the house across the street, 1242 Maple Drive." They're still inside. He hung up before the operator could ask any questions. The police would arrive soon, adding another layer of chaos to Hope's homecoming. Alfred took one last look around the house that had been his home for 15 years. Then he walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of his old life. Alfred sat in the sterile environment of his local bank, his face a mask of calm as he systematically dismantled his financial life. The teller, a young woman with concerned eyes, watched as he closed account after account. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Farrell?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "That's a significant amount of money to transfer offshore." Alfred nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Quite sure. Thank you. I'm making some lifestyle changes." As the last of his and Hope's joint accounts was drained, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd spent weeks researching offshore banking, setting up a labyrinth of transfers that would be nearly impossible to trace. Hope wouldn't see a penny of it. Next stop, the credit card companies. One by one, Alfred canceled every card they shared. He could almost hear the distant sound of Hope's wallet becoming worthless. Sitting in his car outside the bank, Alfred pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before composing an email to his boss at the post office. "Dear Dave, I regret to inform you that I must resign from my position, effective immediately. Personal circumstances have arisen that require my full attention. I apologize for the short notice and any inconvenience this may cause. Thank you for your understanding. Sincerely, Alfred Herold." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 15 years of service ended with a few taps on a screen, but it was necessary. He couldn't risk anyone at work connecting him to what was about to unfold at the radio station. Alfred's next task was perhaps the cruelest, but he felt no remorse as he sealed the envelope. Inside was a comprehensive dossier of Hope and Justin's affair, hotel receipts, email printouts, photos from the motel. On the front, in clear block letters, he'd written, "Mrs. Faith Hendricks." He dropped the package in a mailbox across town, imagining the bomb it would detonate in Justin's home. Let him feel the sting of betrayal, too. As the sun began to set, Alfred drove to the long-term parking lot at the airport. He pulled into a spot near the back, away from the security cameras. From his trunk, he retrieved a suitcase he'd packed for this very purpose. He placed the suitcase on the passenger seat, making sure it was clearly visible. On top, he left a printed itinerary for a one-way flight to Bangkok, departing in 2 days. Let them chase shadows halfway around the world. His final stop was the small apartment he'd rented under the name Nick Buford. It was sparsely furnished, but it had everything he needed: a bed, a desk, and most importantly, a top-of-the-line computer setup. Alfred settled into the chair, powering up the multiple monitors. On one screen, he pulled up the feed from the hidden cameras in his and Hope's house. Another showed the security footage from the radio station. A third displayed local news sites, ready to catch any breaking stories. He leaned back, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. The pieces were all in place. Now, he just had to watch it all burn. As night fell, Alfred Farrell disappeared, and Nick Buford, a man with no past and an uncertain future, began his vigil. Hope Farrell's heels clicked against the polished floor of the WKRP radio station lobby, the sound echoing in the early morning quiet. She was running late for the charity event planning meeting, her mind still fuzzy from a night of stolen moments with Justin. As she rounded the corner, her steps faltered, then stopped completely. There, dominating the lobby wall, was a life-size poster of her and Justin locked in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel. Hope's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Beneath the damning image, blood-red letters screamed, "We know what you did." "Oh my God," she whispered, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Around her, the lobby began to fill with arriving employees. Gasps and whispers erupted as each person caught sight of the poster. Hope stood frozen, feeling dozens of eyes boring into her. "Hope, what's going on? Why is everyone—" Justin's voice cut off abruptly as he entered the lobby. His face, usually so confident and charming, drained of all color. Their eyes met across the room, panic and shame mirrored in each other's gaze. In that moment, Hope knew their carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around them. Farrell, Hendricks, my office now. The station manager's voice boomed through the lobby, cutting through the growing murmurs. Hope and Justin followed him in silence, feeling like condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. As the office door closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the lobby, Hope felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Would either of you care to explain what the hell is going on out there? The manager's face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Hope opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? Justin, ever the smooth talker, tried to salvage the situation. Sir, I can assure you, this is all just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? The manager slammed his fist on the desk. There's a billboard-sized photo of you two going at it like rabbits in my lobby. Do you have any idea what this could do to the station? To our reputation? Hope sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. You're both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, the manager continued. Now get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. As they left the office, Hope's phone buzzed with a text from Alfred. Hope, something's happened at the house. You need to come home now. Hope's heart, already racing, kicked into overdrive. What else could possibly go wrong? She raced home, her mind a whirl of panic and confusion. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw police cars parked outside. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her keys. The moment she stepped inside, Hope's world tilted on its axis. The house was in shambles, drawers upended, pictures smashed. It looked like a tornado had torn through their once peaceful home. Mrs. Farrell, a police officer approached her. We received a call about a break-in at this address. Can you tell us if anything's missing? Hope stumbled through the house in a daze, barely registering the officer's words. When she reached the bedroom, she saw it, a letter, placed neatly on her pillow amidst the chaos. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read. Alfred's words, cold and cutting, laid bare every secret, every lie. He knew. He had always known. Hope's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, the letter clutched to her chest. As the reality of what she'd lost crashed over her, Hope began to sob, great heaving cries that shook her entire body. The police officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, their suspicions growing with each passing moment. Across town, Faith Hendricks stared at the package that had just arrived, its contents spread across her kitchen table. Photos, emails, hotel receipts, irrefutable evidence of her husband's infidelity. With a calm she didn't feel, Faith walked to the front door and changed the locks. Then she called her lawyer. When Justin arrived home that evening, he found divorce papers waiting for him on the porch. And in a small, nondescript apartment, Alfred Farrell, now Nick Buford, watched it all unfold on his bank of monitors, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. He observed the chaos he had orchestrated with a mixture of grim satisfaction and a deep, aching sadness. Cheers, Hope, he murmured, raising his glass to the screen. I hope it was worth it. Hope Farrell stood in the checkout line at the local grocery store, her cart filled with the bare necessities. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her wallet, knowing what was coming but praying for a miracle nonetheless. I'm sorry, ma'am, the cashier said, a hint of pity in her eyes. Your card's been declined. Hope felt the stares of the people in line behind her, heard their impatient sighs. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she fumbled for another card, then another, each one useless, canceled by Alfred in his meticulous destruction of their shared life. I'll have to come back, she mumbled, abandoning her cart and fleeing the store. In her car, Hope let out a strangled sob. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, she'd had it all. A loving husband, a good job, financial security. Now it was all gone, evaporated like morning dew under the harsh light of her betrayal. Her phone buzzed. Justin. Hope considered ignoring it, but desperation won out. They needed to find Alfred, to try and salvage something from this wreckage. Any luck? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Justin's bitter laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh yeah, tons of luck. All bad. The PI we hired can't find a trace of Alfred. It's like he's vanished into thin air. Hope's grip tightened on the steering wheel. We have to keep looking. He's got all our money, Justin. I can't even buy groceries. You think I'm doing any better? Justin snapped. The station fired me. My wife's divorcing me. I'm sleeping on my buddy's couch. This is all your fault, you know. My fault. Hope's voice rose incredulously. It takes two to have an affair, Justin. You were just as involved as I was. Yeah, well, it wasn't my husband who went psycho and destroyed our lives, was it? The call ended abruptly, leaving Hope alone with her thoughts. She drove aimlessly, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. There had to be. Her phone rang again. Hope's heart leapt, hoping it was Justin calling back to apologize. Instead, she saw her mother's number on the screen. Mom, she answered hesitantly. Hope Elizabeth Farrell. Her mother's voice was ice cold. Would you care to explain why I just received an anonymous email detailing your indiscretions? Hope's blood ran cold. Mom, I can explain. Save it. Her mother cut her off. Your father and I are beyond disappointed. We raised you better than this. Until you come to your senses and beg Alfred's forgiveness, don't bother calling us. The line went dead. Hope pulled over to the side of the road, her vision blurring with tears. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. Meanwhile, in his rented apartment, Alfred, or rather, Nick Buford, leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He'd just hit send on the email to Hope's parents, another nail in the coffin of her former life. He turned his attention back to the monitors, watching Hope break down in her car through the traffic cam he'd hacked. Part of him wanted to reach out, to comfort her. But that part was quickly silenced by the memory of her betrayal. You made your bed, Hope, he murmured. Now lie in it. As the weeks turned into months, Hope and Justin's desperate search for Alfred continued to yield nothing. Their relationship, once passionate and exciting, deteriorated into a series of bitter arguments and recriminations. This is useless, Justin shouted during one particularly heated exchange. We're never going to find him. And even if we did, what then? You think he's just going to hand over the money and forgive us? Hope sank onto the worn couch in Justin's friend's apartment, where they'd both been staying. We have to keep trying, she said, her voice hollow. What else can we do? Justin ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his once handsome face haggard with stress. I don't know, Hope. I just don't know anymore. As they sat in defeated silence, neither of them aware of the hidden camera capturing their every move, transmitting it all back to the man they were so desperately seeking. 6 months after Alfred Farrell's disappearance, a new novel hit the shelves. The Postman Always Knows Twice by M.B. Fowler became an overnight sensation. Critics hailed it as a gripping tale of betrayal and revenge. Readers couldn't put it down, and talk shows clamored to interview the mysterious author. Hope Farrell stood in the local bookstore, staring at the display of novels with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The cover showed a stylized image of a man in a postal uniform, his back turned, walking away from a woman reaching out to him. It was too close to home, too familiar. With shaking hands, she picked up a copy and began to read. Page after page, her own story unfolded before her eyes. The names were changed, certain details altered. But there was no mistaking it. This was her life, her affair, her downfall, laid bare for the world to see. It can't be, she whispered, drawing curious glances from other shoppers. It can't be him. But deep down, she knew. Alfred, quiet, unassuming Alfred, had outplayed them all. Across town, Justin Hendricks was having a similar revelation. He'd been channel surfing in his dingy studio apartment when he saw a familiar face on the screen. It was Alfred, looking more confident and put together than Justin had ever seen him. "So, Mr. Fowler," the talk show host was saying, "your novel has struck a chord with readers everywhere. What inspired you to write it?" Alfred, or N.B. Fowler, as he was now known, smiled enigmatically. "Well, Barbara, I think we've all experienced betrayal in some form or another. I wanted to explore what happens when someone decides not to just lie down and take it, but to fight back." Justin fumbled for his phone, dialing Hope's number with trembling fingers. "Are you seeing this?" he hissed when she answered. "It's Alfred. He's written a book about us." "I know," Hope replied, her voice hollow. "I'm holding a copy right now." As Alfred's book tour continued, his star only rose higher. He appeared on more talk shows, gave interviews to major newspapers, even hinted at a possible movie deal. With each appearance, he gained more sympathy as the wrong spouse who had turned his pain into art. Meanwhile, Hope and Justin watched their lives crumble further. They consulted lawyers about suing for defamation, but without hard evidence that the novel was about them, and with Alfred's meticulous changes to protect himself legally, they were advised it would be a losing battle. "He's ruined us," Hope said dully, staring at the cease and desist letter their lawyer had received in response to their inquiries. "Completely and utterly ruined us." Justin, who had been pacing the small office, suddenly whirled on her. "No, Hope, you ruined us. You and your inability to keep your damn mouth shut about our affair. If you hadn't bragged to your friends, if you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened." As they descended into yet another argument, neither noticed the small camera hidden in the potted plant in the corner of the lawyer's office, transmitting their distress to a man miles away. Alfred, now comfortably settled in a luxurious apartment paid for by his book success, watched the feed with a mix of satisfaction and unexpected melancholy. He had won. He had his revenge. So, why didn't he feel as triumphant as he'd expected? Shaking off the moment of doubt, Alfred turned his attention to his laptop. He had charitable donations to make, anonymously, of course. Let the town see how their once-beloved radio personality and his mistress had fallen, while a mysterious benefactor supported local causes. It was the perfect final touch to his plan, the ultimate victory. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered her verdict. Hope sat rigid in her chair, her once stylish clothes now worn and shabby. Across the aisle, Alfred, looking every inch the successful author in a tailored suit, listened impassively. "In the matter of Farrell versus Farrell," the judge began, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Alfred Farrell. Given the evidence presented of Mrs. Farrell's infidelity and Mr. Farrell's significant contributions to the marriage, the division of assets will be as follows." Hope barely heard the rest. It was over. Alfred had won again. The careful documentation of her affair, the financial records showing how he'd supported her through graduate school, the character witnesses attesting to his upstanding nature and her recent erratic behavior. It had all added up to this moment. As the court adjourned, Hope watched Alfred stride confidently out of the room. He didn't even glance in her direction. She was nothing to him now. Less than nothing. Weeks later, Hope sat at her small kitchen table, pen hovering over a blank sheet of paper. She'd lost everything. Her job, her reputation, her family's support. Alfred's book was still topping the bestseller list, a constant reminder of her shame. In desperation, she decided to make one last appeal. "Dear Alfred," she wrote, her handwriting shaky, "I know I have no right to contact you, no right to ask for anything, but I'm begging you, please. Can we talk? I know what I did was unforgivable, but I never meant to hurt you. I never stopped loving you. Please, Alfred, I have nothing left. No one left. You're my only hope." She sealed the letter with tears in her eyes, clinging to a shred of hope that somewhere, deep down, Alfred still cared. 3 days later, a large manila envelope arrived at Hope's apartment. Her heart leapt. Had Alfred read her letter? Was this a response? But as she tore it open, her hope turned to ashes. Inside was a formal cease and desist order, threatening legal action if she attempted to contact Alfred again. It was signed by his lawyer, not even by Alfred himself. Hope sank to the floor, the papers scattered around her. It was truly, finally over. Across town, Justin Hendricks packed the last of his meager belongings into a battered suitcase. The town that had once adored him now shunned him at every turn. No one would hire him, not even for the most menial jobs. Every stranger's glance felt accusing. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about him. He couldn't take it anymore. With no destination in mind, Justin tossed his suitcase into his car, the one possession he'd managed to keep, and drove away from the town that had been his home for so long. He didn't look back. Meanwhile, Alfred Farrell stood in the local animal shelter, surrounded by the barks and meows of abandoned pets. He'd started volunteering here a few weeks ago, finding an unexpected solace in caring for these forgotten creatures. As he walked down the row of kennels, a pair of soulful brown eyes caught his attention. A mixed-breed dog, probably part lab, part who knows what, watched him cautiously. The sign on the kennel read Max, 3 years old, abandoned. Something in the dog's wary gaze struck a chord in Alfred. Here was another being who had been betrayed, left behind by those who should have cared for him. "Hey there, Max," Alfred said softly, crouching down. "How about we start over together?" Max's tail gave a tentative wag, and as Alfred filled out the adoption papers, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to trust again, to love again. It wouldn't be easy. The pain of Hope's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in his chest. But as he clipped a leash onto Max's collar and led him out of the shelter, Alfred felt the first stirrings of a new chapter beginning. "Come on, boy," he said, scratching Max behind the ears. "Let's go home." As they walked out into the sunlight, Alfred Farrell, author, divorce, and now dog owner, took his first step towards a future unburdened by the weight of betrayal and revenge. Max trotted alongside him, his paws padding softly on the sidewalk. For a moment, Alfred allowed himself to imagine a life filled with simple pleasures, long walks in the park, quiet evenings by the fireplace, the unconditional love of a loyal companion. But as they reached Alfred's car, a flicker of movement across the street caught his eye. There, half hidden behind a parked van, stood Hope. Her once perfect hair was limp and unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by a shabby sweater and jeans. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment. Alfred felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, a ghost of the love he'd once felt. For a heartbeat, he considered crossing the street, speaking to her, offering what? Forgiveness? A second chance? Max whined softly, drawing Alfred's attention back to the present. He looked down at the dog, then back up at Hope. She took a hesitant step forward, hope blooming in her eyes. Alfred shook his head once, firmly. Then he opened the car door, helped Max inside, and drove away without looking back. As the shelter receded in his rearview mirror, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The chapter of his life that included Hope was over. He had exacted his revenge, written his story, and now it was time to move on. He glanced at Max, who was watching the world go by with eager curiosity. "Well, boy," Alfred said, reaching over to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Looks like it's just you and me now. Ready for a new adventure." Max's tail thumped against the seat in response. As they drove home, Alfred's mind wandered to his next book project. Perhaps a lighter tale this time, something about new beginnings and second chances. He had a feeling he'd have plenty of inspiration. The sun was setting as Alfred pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of his new home. A modest but comfortable house bought with the proceeds from his bestseller. As he and Max walked up the path, Alfred felt a sense of peace settle over him. Inside, he unclipped Max's leash and watched as the dog cautiously explored his new surroundings. Alfred moved through the house, turning on lights and shedding the persona of N.B. Fowler, successful author, like an old coat. In his study, he paused before the wall of framed clippings, reviews of his book, photos from his talk show appearances, the New York Times bestseller list with his name at the top, mementos of his triumph, his revenge. For a moment, he considered taking them down. But no, they were part of his story now, a reminder of how far he'd come and what he'd overcome. Max padded into the room, pressing against Alfred's leg. Alfred looked down at the dog, then back at the wall of memories. "You know what, Max?" he said softly. "I think we both deserve a fresh start." He reached out and straightened one of the frames, a small smile playing on his lips. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define his future. As the night deepened, Alfred settled into his favorite armchair, a notebook open on his lap. Max curled up at his feet, a warm, comforting presence. The house was quiet save for the scratch of pen on paper and the occasional contented sigh from the dog. Alfred wrote late into the night, pouring out ideas for his new novel. But this time, instead of a tale of betrayal and revenge, he found himself writing about redemption, about the healing power of unexpected connections. As he finally set down his pen and prepared for bed, Alfred realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: excitement for the future. He had survived the storm of betrayal, navigated the turbulent waters of revenge, and now found himself on the shores of a new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. But for now, as he drifted off to sleep with Max, snoring softly beside the bed, Alfred Farrell was content. The story of the betrayed postal worker was over. The story of Alfred Farrell, author and dog owner, was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
So that's why she didn't come to the funeral, didn't even acknowledge my letter, Penny thought. She put her forehead to the cold glass in the window overlooking the village street, gazing with a detached vision at the blanket of early December snow, which was covering the street and narrow front garden with a lovely covering of white. But Penny wasn't fooled. She knew the ugliness and neglect that was hidden below the snow. She knew this would be a bleak Christmas for her, like so many of the others she had gritted her teeth through over the years while others basked in the glow of the season within the bosoms of their families. She let her shoulders sag and loosened her finger hold on the typed letter, letting it flutter to the floor. She had thought that it was because Millie still carried the resentment of their parents, their father an ever-complaining tyrant and their mother a whiny alcoholic. The estrangement had sent Millie spinning out of England to Spain, where she'd been this last decade and more, answering Penny's letters with only terse responses, not answering their father's few, complaining and judgmental letters at all. Not that Penny would have answered the letters from her father to Millie that she'd gotten a glimpse of either, full of bitterness and judgment for Millie having gone off with a foreigner and not, to anyone's knowledge, having ever married him. Penny knew why Millie hadn't married Rodrigo. He already was married, and, being Catholic, there would be no divorce even if there was no love. He'd been older than Millie. Millie had let Penny know when Rodrigo had died, but her father had been so bitter about it that neither one had bothered to tell him. Now this letter, from a hospital in Lugo, Spain, from some sort of patient representative, a sister someone or other. Penny's father buried not more than a week in Penny, who had taken full care of him at his village house during his last 2 months, only now beginning to wrap up his affairs and go back to her job in the bookstore. It was the Christmas season. The bookstore would need all of its employees pulling overtime. They hadn't been kind about holding her job for her while she cared for her father in his last days, certainly not considering how much time and effort she'd given them for over a decade. The bookstore was her total life now, but it didn't seem like she meant that much to the bookstore. The problem was that now the hospital in Spain wanted to send Millie back to her house. There wasn't anything they could do for her. The cancer was too far advanced. She was insisting on going home to die. But there had to be someone there to receive Millie and take care of her. Penny was the only relative of hers that Millie had identified on her admittance forms, and she claimed there was no one in Spain to take care of her. Penny knew, though, that her job wouldn't be held for her to allow her to attend another relative through a terminal illness, certainly not during the Christmas season. With a sigh, Penny reached down and picked the letter up off the floor. Family was family, no matter how estranged. She sank down into the chair at the old secretary, read the address at the top of the letter and the sister's name, and began to write her return letter. Penny hadn't expected to be met by anyone at the airport in Santiago. She'd sent her flight number and arrival time in the letter telling Sister Noela at the Lugo hospital she was coming, but she hadn't received an answer. But there was a younger man, at least young in Penny's mind, as she was a bit past 30 herself, standing in the reception hall, waving a sign with her name on it. How many Penelope Stanleys could there be coming off the same flight in northwestern Spain? Sonora Stanley, he asked rather hesitatingly when she came and stood in front of him and pointed to his sign. She had never thought of herself as tall, but she was a couple of inches taller than he was. Other than that, he seemed normal and was supporting an engaging smile. He was dark-haired and a bit swarthy, but quite presentable. Looking at him now, she could see that he probably was older than she was, maybe even 10 years. If so, the years had treated him well. "Yes, I am Penny Stanley," she answered, trying to give him a smile that equaled his. But she'd just come off a long day catching her flight without knowing where she was going from here other than the address of her sister's house somewhere in the region. Somewhere on a mountain slope above the Mijo River, if she remembered rightly what her sister had once written to her. She had no idea how far it was from the Santiago airport, though. She could tell from the map that there was a good distance between Santiago and Lugo, where the hospital was. "I am Jesus," the man said in halting and heavily accented, but easily understood, English. "Jesus has come to take you to your home. I know you didn't expect anyone from the family to meet you. The hospital didn't know that your sister had family here until it was too late to inform you." Penny was quick to adjust to the man's way of referring to himself by name, although it made her smile each time she heard it. She also was greatly relieved to know that there was someone here with connections to Millie, and that she didn't have to figure out everything for herself. My home? Penny thought. Hardly, although she couldn't say where her home was at the moment. Her own flat in Reading was just a rental, and she'd put her father's house close to Oxford up for sale, and already had offers on that, as housing was tight in the university town. It had also been uplifting to discover that houses, even a modest one like her father had lived in, went for a good price in the Oxford area. If she could find a far cheaper economy to live in, she could squeak by on the interest from what she'd get for the house without having to continue working herself. As she was afraid, the bookstore had let her go, and she didn't have a specific job to go back to. She wasn't that fond of her flat in Reading either, so home was something to be negotiated at this point when the time came. It certainly wasn't in a remote area of hot and dusty Spain, though. "Did you say Jesus? Is your name really Jesus?" she asked, trying, unsuccessfully, to keep the tone of disbelief and challenge out of her voice. That couldn't be right. He just beamed back at her. "Yes. We don't spell it as you would, but it's the same name. We use that name in Spain. Spanish Catholics believe in instilling the attributes of the Holy Family in our families. My father's name was Jesus and his father's name was Jesus. So, my name is Jesus. My brother is Joseph and my mother is Maria." "So? Oh, well, that's interesting," Penny said. And strange, she thought, but she didn't want to start off on the wrong foot with anyone here, especially someone who had met her at the airport to take her to Millie's house. As they drove east from Santiago, she appreciated even more that someone had come to pick her up, as the journey was long and the route convoluted. But she also was surprised to find that her impression of Spain as hot and dusty didn't hold for this Galician region. The hills were rolling and still lush with vegetation. It was been a crazy year in weather across Europe, and winter had not reached northern Spain yet. It was as green as England was in summer, even more green if that was possible, while being wilder and more lush in foliage, and with steeper slopes running down to the faster-flowing waterways. The villages they passed on the way were even smaller and less ordered than those in the Reading area and as old, if not older, most being made out of stone, many unoccupied and falling down. But in a picturesque way. She wouldn't have known that Christmas was approaching if many of the houses didn't already have colored lights and a smattering of outdoor Christmas ornaments on display. It was nearly dark when they arrived at a hodgepodge of stone cottages set at angles and closely abutting a small, winding road high above a meandering river, with a checkerboard of garden plots, many planted to grapevines, tumbling down the slope to the water. Nothing was in flower or full leaf now, of course, but it didn't take much to envision how vital this countryside would look in full bloom. "Fincas," Jesus explained as he maneuvered along a road, hugging the side of the mountain, and observed Penny looking down at the pattern of small plots. "Fincas?" "Yes. Through the centuries, family holdings of the fields became divided and subdivided and families intermarried to the point that everything is divided into small plots. Fincas, And a family now could have a series of the plots located separately so that they have to do more walking than tending of the plots to cover them all in a day. Sonora de Perez has several of the fincas down there. Sonora de Perez? Yes, your sister. Zesis gave her a quizzical look. Ah, yes, Penny said. So, Millie was going by the name Perez here rather than Stanley. That must have been Rodrigo's surname. They will think the two of them were married here. It's likely they didn't know Rodrigo had a wife elsewhere. That was natural enough, she supposed. If the villagers knew of their living arrangements, they likely would be unwelcoming, and Millie wasn't one to take an effort to make friends herself. Zesis pulled up in front of a stone cottage that looked like a ruin and that was so close to the road that the small Fiat Zesis was driving barely had room to park between the road and the rock wall. A door opened, and light spilled out onto the Fiat before it was stifled by the figure of a heavy-set, elderly woman. Doors. From the village. She has been sitting with Sonora de Perez, Zesis explained. And so it began. Millie had already been sent home from the hospital to die. Yet another ordeal of vigilance to the end for Penny. Her last living relative, and yet another one who she had not been close to in life. She hauled herself out of the Fiat and reached for her suitcase, but Zesis was faster than she was at hefting it. The village woman, Doors, gave her a stiff, "Hola, buenas," and an, "It's about time you got here," look as she stood aside for Penny to enter the cottage. The two women had barely acknowledged each other at the door before Doors had turned to return to the sick room, and Penny's attention had been arrested by seeing a decorated Christmas tree beside a fireplace in which a fire had been laid. She almost cried. She hadn't had time to even think about decorating a tree before she left England. Seeing where her gaze was turned, Zesis gently said, "Christmas trees are important back in England. We thought." Yes, thank you, Zesis. It's lovely." And indeed it was. Already the heaviness that had been weighing her down for what it seemed like years was lifting. "Now, maybe I should see my sister," she said, pulling herself back into reality. Millie had settled down at last, the effects of the morphine finally having taken hold. Penny had held and rocked her just as she'd seen the village woman, Doors, doing while Zesis was showing her around the cottage. There hadn't been much to see inside the house, and it was a work in progress, although the progress part of the work was well done. There was the main room that served as living room, dining room, and kitchen. This room, as well as Millie's, off to the left as the cottage was entered, had been tastefully renovated with some sections of the wall being stone and some white plasterboard. The plasterboard sections were hung with abstract landscapes that obviously were from the village area and were masterfully done. Lights hung over these, the only lighting in the room other than the glowing Christmas tree, to which Penny's eyes frequently wandered in appreciation. Millie's bedroom was large, with a similar wall treatment. A modernized bath and large walk-in closet were on the street side of this wing, and the bedroom opened up onto a stone terrace that ran the full length of the house on the back, with a view down the slope to the Miho River and up the mountainside on the other side of the narrow river valley. The room to which Zesis had taken Penny's suitcase was on the other side of the house. Her bedroom was small, but also opened out onto the terrace and back. The walls were just stone, and the room obviously hadn't been renovated yet. A primitive bath, entered from both sides, separated it from a room, also not renovated, on the front of the house, which obviously was an office and catch-all room. From the art supplies strewn about, it also had once been used as an art studio. The unfinished paintings were by the same hand as those on the walls in the renovated part of the house. Rodrigo? Penny wondered. She couldn't think of Millie as having artistic talent, but she was having difficulty remembering anything about Millie, who was nearly 10 years Penny's senior and had left England and, as she put it, the clutches of her family, when Penny was too young and alienated from the family herself to pay much attention. She didn't know any more about Rodrigo, other than that Millie said, when she left, that she'd follow him to the ends of the earth if she had to. As Penny remembered it, her father's major objection, her mother was too deep into the bottle to voice much of an opinion one way or other, was that Rodrigo had been a good 10 years older than Millie was, and was a foreigner and a dreamer. Being a dreamer obviously was a sin in Penny's parents' eyes. Doors, in a language Penny couldn't fathom and that didn't seem like Spanish, which Penny had some familiarity with, attempted to convey Millie's painkiller injection schedule to Penny. Zesis, who said Doors was speaking Galician, more like Portuguese than Spanish, interpreted as best he could. Penny managed to get across that she knew all about applying the drugs, as she had just been through that with her father and only needed to know the schedule. When that had been dispensed with, she suddenly found herself alone. All alone, sitting beside a lowly moaning woman who was a mere bag of bones version of the sister she had known so little and so long ago. All alone in a stone cottage, perched on a mountainside who knew where. All alone, Penny had to make frequent trips out to the living room to look at the Christmas tree to keep from sinking into depression. When Millie's breathing became regular, Penny rose from beside the bed and started to wander more purposely around the small house. The light was dim in the main room other than around the Christmas tree. She went to the refrigerator, which was almost bare. What would they do for food? She wondered. Where could she get some? How could she get some? There was a jug in the refrigerator, and she quickly ascertained that it had wine in it. She found a wine glass. There didn't seem to be any dearth of wine glasses in the kitchen. Millie quite likely was her mother's daughter. But Penny wouldn't be catty about that at this moment. She couldn't think of anything more that she wanted, no, needed, at this moment, than wine. She poured herself a glass, pulled a throw blanket off the back of a sofa to wrap around herself, wandered out onto the terrace, and sat in a patio chair there. The moon was full and picked out the checkerboard pattern of fields. What Zeus had said were fincas, cascading like folds in a blanket down to the ribbon of water below, reflecting the light of the moon. She sighed. The view was divine. The wine was delicious. After a few minutes, though, she shook her head. She wasn't anywhere close to be in the mood to be seduced by this wild and primitive country. She was still in the mood to feel sorry for herself, and at a loss of how she could be expected to carry on here. She rose and walked back into the house, letting her feet carry her to what had been the studio at the front of the house, with its intriguing mysteries. It wasn't just the stacks of paintings, many unfinished, to explore. When Zeus had breezed her through the room before, she'd seen that there was an old secretary desk there with papers strewn across the top. She'd even seen the envelope with her name on it, propped up on the base of the desk lamp. She sat at the desk and fingered the envelope. She returned it to its resting place and took a swig of her wine. She wasn't ready to face whatever that said yet. Her eye went to a couple of folded pages that looked like documents. The thicker of the two seemed to be a will. Ah, good, progress, she thought. Whether there was one, and where it could be found had been a worry in the back of her mind all the time she was flying here. She had no idea what, if anything, Millie had to leave behind, let alone who she'd leave it to. She only knew that she'd be left doing something about it. She had kept forcing those worries into the background, as being ghoulish to be thinking about yet. She folded the official-looking document open now. It was in Spanish and hard to decipher, but she saw Millie's name, with the surname Perez and her own on the first sheet. There were 3 sheets of paper, the other 2 with Millie's name but someone else's, a different name on each sheet. There were lists of bequests, probably of property, under the names on each sheet. The light was too dim to make it all out, but the listings weren't identical. They seemed to be for different property. Just then, the other legal-looking document was disturbed and fell open. This too was in Spanish, but this was more identifiable. It was a marriage certificate. The names on it were Rodrigo Perez Varela and Millicent Stanley de Perez. It was dated some 6 years earlier. So, they were married. But Millie had never thought to notify either their father or Penny. Why would Millie keep this from Penny? Millie had communicated rarely and then only tersely, but Penny had regularly. But then, no, she hadn't. She'd followed Millie's lead more than 8 years ago. She'd stopped writing too because little was coming back, and that was before the marriage. Still, Penny reached back for the will to more closely examine that, but just then the lights went out. Her first thought was what sort of backwater place was this that cut the power at night? That was her second thought too, but then she thought, oh well, she was exhausted anyway and had experienced too much today already. She downed the last of the wine in her glass and felt her way through the connecting bathroom to what would be her bedroom, just barely tolerable in its unrenovated condition. Groping around, she found that there was a candle in a holder on her bed stand, with matches beside it. She took this as further evidence that the power was routinely cut at night in the village. The candle gave her enough light to pull nightclothes out of her suitcase, use the primitive bathroom facilities, and climb into bed. She was awakened sometime after dawn by the cries of pain coming from across the house. Damn, she thought, looking at her clock and springing out of bed. She'd missed the injection schedule by an hour. Her first testing with taking care of her sister, and she'd bungled the time by an hour. Millie must be in deep pain. Injecting the morphine and getting under Millie and rocking her body until the cries and sobbing subsided took longer than Penny had imagined it would. Doors had been so good about it the previous night, and Penny was so clumsy. Penny would give anything to have the old village woman here now, and she was sure that Millie thought the same, to the extent that Millie could think anything. Millie was lucid, though. For a brief moment or two between the painkiller deadening the pain took effect and put her into a merciful, painless dreamland. It was just a moment of recognition. Her eyes turned to Penny, and a voice Penny recognized across the years weakly said, "Penny, you've come?" Penny castigated herself later for her response. Automatic, unthinking. "You were married, Millie. You didn't tell us." Millie's eyes went dull. She muttered, "You wouldn't have cared if I did." And she turned her face to the wall and was unconscious. Sitting there on the side of the bed, the frail body of her older sister still in her embrace, Penny began to cry silently. She rocked her sister's inert body back and forth, murmuring over and over again, "I would have cared. I would have cared." Getting control of herself, she worked her way from underneath Millie and arranged her sister as comfortably as she could be in the bed. Standing, she looked down at Millie as she smoothed down the flanks of her nightdress. "Oh, Millie, 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 what has become of our family?" she murmured. Not that there would be a family for her for very much longer. She already felt the loneliness slicing through her. A couple of hours later, Penny groped her way into the main room and over to the kitchen area, set up by an island counter. She stared, with regret, at the collapsed, obviously empty, coffee packet and electric coffee pot, unusable with the power still being off. She barely had time to open the unpowered refrigerator to scout out if there was anything that resembled breakfast for her that hadn't spoiled, when there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Zesis breezed past her with a cardboard box filled with groceries. She caught up with him in time to retrieve the package of ground coffee from on top. "Zesis forgot to tell you where the nearest market was," he said. "So Zesis got a few things for you. Would it help to know where the grocery store is?" Penny asked. "How would I get there?" She recognized that she sounded a bit petulant. She couldn't help it. Everyone else blamed morning grouch on the lack of coffee. She'd do so with the best of them. Was she the only one to realize how marooned and out of her element she was here? "There's the Renault. You can drive when you've found the way." "The Renault?" "Yes, under the terrace. The garage. Do you know how to drive?" "Yes, of course." "The refrigerator isn't working," he said. The door open. The light inside not on. "No, the power hasn't come back on," Penny said. "Come back on? How did it go off?" "You don't lose power at night in the village?" "It's been off since last night." "No, we don't lose power at night." "Do you have your power cut at night in England?" "No, of course not. We don't either. Here. Zesis will be back soon." He handed her the half-unloaded box and disappeared through the front door. Penny barely had time to unload the rest of the groceries before he was back with a short, grizzled-looking, middle-aged man. The lights had already come back on right before the two men showed up. "Bad fuse," Zesis explained. "Veeder fixed." "This is Veeder." Penny and the Spaniard acknowledged each other, while Zesis continued. "Veeder lives 2 houses down. He did the work on this house. He can finish for you, if you want. You have any trouble like power going out, just go get Veeder." Veeder is Zesis' father's cousin. "Are you all related in this village?" Penny asked, as a joke. "Mostly yes," Zesis answered seriously. At that moment there was another knock at the door. When she opened the door, she could have hugged doors and pulled her inside. As far as Penny knew, doors had been finished here last night, and Penny was entirely on her own now. It only took the one time having to medicate Millie for Penny to know how ill-prepared she was to take over totally. Millie was a much more difficult patient than Penny's father had been, and so frail that Penny was afraid she'd break each time Penny touched her. Penny didn't hug the woman, though, not only because Doors was still taking on a stern countenance, but also because the old woman was holding a basket in front of her. Behind her was another woman, thinner and taller than Doors, but still elderly. She held a large oblong loaf of bread. Handing Penny the basket, Doors marched past her and straight to the bedroom, where, on cue, Millie was rousing and beginning to moan in pain. The other woman stopped in front of Penny, smiled shyly, perched the loaf of bread on top of the contents of the basket, and then continued on past to the kitchen counter. "Maria," Zesis explained to Penny. "She'll help tidy up the house." And, after another shy bob, Maria started doing just that, giving the door into Millie's bedroom a wide berth. "Now, Zesis will be back this afternoon to show you where your finkas are. Where's something you can work in a garden in. The weather has been strange this year. Whereas you were getting winter in England, winter hasn't appeared here yet this year. We haven't had a frost yet, and the weeds know that. But I'll have my sister to take care of. This is not a sprint, Sonora Stanley. Doors will go soon, but she'll be back after lunch to watch Sonora de Perez for a few hours. You need to have breaks." "Doors will come back?" "Yes, as long as she is needed and you need breaks. We are all family here. We will do this together." Penny stood at the door, almost in tears, as she waved Zesis and Veter down the narrow street toward where Veter's house must be located. "You are a good worker," Zesis said, as they arrived back at the Fiat parked at the end of a row of grapevine frames, and he brought out a bottle of wine. "You work fast and don't complain. When you told me we would be weeding in the vineyard and garden finca, I thought the job would be too big to tackle," Penny said, as she collapsed against the car and gratefully received a glass of wine. "My sister must have been in the hospital for some time, and not have been able to tend to the fields for quite some time before that." "The whole village took on the work," Zesis answered. "Ah, that part about you being one big family." "Yes. Tell me, I haven't really seen my sister for a long time. Did she get along well in the village?" "Your sister was. She was a difficult woman to get along with." "Ah, I'm not surprised. But the village is treating her like family anyway? I've seen how good and patient Doors is with her, even though I don't discern any affection for Millie there. Is it her sense of treating everyone in the village as family?" "Yes, of course, why not? Because she is family." "I don't understand. Doors Varela is Rodrigo's mother. She did her duty correctly to your sister as Rodrigo's wife, and she is helping to care for your sister because she is family. She could not hold her head up in the village if she didn't do what she could for family. Doors does it for Rodrigo, though, not for your sister. It is complicated. It was clear that Rodrigo loved your sister and that she loved him. But what, Zesis? But Maria is Doors' best friend in the world, and her cousin, so she has always been reserved with your sister." "Maria? The woman who came with Doors this morning to clean? I noticed that she didn't come close to my sister's bedroom. Did she and my sister not get along?" "At some distance. They were family too, but—" Penny laughed. "This family business seems quite incestuous. How is Maria family to Millie?" "Rodrigo's first wife, Antia, was Maria's daughter. But once she had died and Rodrigo married your sister, even though they had been living together for some time already, your sister became family too. There is no choice in who is family and who isn't." He looked like he thought Penny was going to dispute that assertion and that he'd have to repeat it more forcefully. Penny didn't challenge him, though. As Millie's sister, she realized she had to respond to any of this family business gently and with sensitivity. "And you? Where do you fit into this family, Zesis?" she asked, assuming she had reached the end of this string at last, flabbergasted at how interrelated the villagers were, and that Millie could become, and couldn't escape, being accepted into their family simply by marrying Rodrigo. "Maria is my mother. Antia was my sister." The conversation paused there as Penny tried to catch her breath at this revelation. This man, who had been so kind and supportive of her, was the brother of the woman Penny's sister had wronged for so many years. Penny was breathless at the mindset of the strength of family and of the simple goodness of these Galician people. "I'm so sorry, Zesis. I didn't realize. You can't have liked my sister very much, and you can't have wanted to help me very much either, as I am her sister." "As I said, your sister is a difficult woman," Zesis said, but then he smiled. "I don't find you a difficult woman, though, at all, and I would help you even if I did, because I'm family," Penny finished for him, and they both laughed, clinked glasses, and took a long drag on their wine. "I must say you people extend the concept of family quite a bit. Let's see. I'm the sister to Rodrigo's second wife, and you are the brother of his first. The relationship of all of us to Rodrigo makes you and me family. If you think about it, all of us on Earth are family," Zesis answered. "And wouldn't it be well if we all thought in those terms?" There wasn't anything Penny could say to that. She just smiled, comforted by the thought and wishing that it could be so. Later that night, after she had managed to settle Millie down, Penny went back to the secretary in the studio and picked up the will again. This time, under stronger light of the candle in addition to the desk lamp, she looked more closely at the 3 separate bequests that had been made. The first set, this house, the fincas Zesis had taken her to today, the Renault under the terrace, and the surrender value of Millie's annuity from her job as a writer were being left to her. A house in the village, presumably Rodrigo's family home, a few parcels of land, and half of the liquid assets went to Doors Varela, Rodrigo's mother. Doors also was to receive Rodrigo's paintings, with the exception of a small one, a portrait of Millie showing a rare smile and now hanging in Millie's bedroom. This painting was to be buried with Millie along with photographs of Rodrigo. The third bequest, yet another village house, parcels of land, and half of the liquid assets went to Maria Sala, the mother of Rodrigo's first wife and sister of Zesis. Then, and only then, did Penny reach for the envelope with her name on it that she hadn't opened the previous night when the power went out. The letter, as well as the envelope, was addressed to her. She read the short note. I at last am facing the reality of going to the hospital with this cancer, and chances are good I won't be coming out again. There isn't much to say to you now other than I'm sorry we are apart, and I wish you well, Penny. I am leaving you a small house in a village that has become both hell and paradise to me. I hope that the bequest will be enough to draw you here and give you the family that neither of us were provided in England. It was tough going for me here, especially after I lost Rodrigo. I brought it on myself, but Rodrigo was worth every moment of it. I hope you can find the inner joy I have from this slice of paradise and a man as good as my Rodrigo. There is a family here for you if you want one. These people never give up. I'm sure they will be surprised as hell, though, that I'm giving most of Rodrigo back to them. I only hope that I am giving you to them as well, and them to you. If you stay, please try to be a better family member than I was. I wish I at least was a better sister than I was and brought you away with me in the first place. I know you will find this hard to believe, but I would have come to Father's funeral if I could have. It would have been for you, and me though, not for him. Millie's note had touched Penny. Not that it didn't have the same hurt and bitter flair of the woman Penny had known in previous written exchanges with her. Their actual face-to-face time was too buried in the past and in family conflict for Penny to remember it. It was, rather, the recognition in the note that family could have beneficial power, and that, in the end, Millie was giving back to her Galician family and showing them some, albeit begrudged, appreciation. This knowledge made it easier for Penny to care for Millie, who was drifting off but too stubborn to give up yet. Penny found that she could hold Millie more tenderly and competently through the rough periods, which were decreasing in frequency and intensity as Millie's body lost strength, and she floated ever further away from the present world. Millie didn't fight her when Penny cleansed her with a wet washcloth, and there was less whimpering in Millie's unconsciousness. Millie hadn't uttered another word to Penny, though, since that first one about not caring, and there was no recognition given that Penny was even there. In the same circumstances, Penny had resented the bitter, almost judgmental, response from her father as he was dying. But now, with Millie, because of the note and Millie's reverting of her husband's property to his family, other than the property given to Penny with the stated purpose that Penny could, at last, find family herself, Penny could let all of the resentment and hurt feelings evaporate. She was better prepared now, just make her sister's last days as comfortable for her and loving for both of them as possible. Each day Doris and Maria appeared in the afternoon to relieve Penny for a couple of hours. Penny came to see Doris' stiffness as just her way, and Doris was nothing but kind toward both Penny and her sister. With each visit, Penny was picking up another Galician word to use in communication with Doris, and Doris was managing an added English word herself. It wasn't lost on Penny that in all the years Millie was with Rodrigo, Doris must have resisted learning any English to aid communication with Millie, and yet she was making an effort to meet Penny halfway. Maria frequently attended with Doris and puttered around the house, cleaning what hadn't gotten dirty and giving Penny shy but friendly looks, but not going near the room where Millie was drifting away. This also wasn't lost on Penny, that Maria had such strong ties with Doris that she wouldn't let her friend handle this alone, and that she openly accepted Penny even though Penny was the sister to the woman who had snatched the husband of Maria's daughter away from her. Jesus appeared daily, too, always with some new way to pull Penny's mind and body away from caring for her sister, if only for an hour or two. Thus it was that he appeared early Friday evening, with Doris and Maria in tow, and declared that Penny was going with him into the nearest town of any size, Montfort de Lemos, to join in a regular meeting of English-speaking residents of the region for cultural pursuits in that language. Or rather, you'll be taking Jesus, he said. We'll take the Renault. You'll drive. So, this is really to get you used to driving the car here. Although it will be good for you to meet with others who wish to exercise their English. Is that why your English is so good? Penny asked, with a chuckle. Because you meet with this group? But of course. You do not think Jesus' English is excellent? Yes, it certainly is, Penny responded. Especially the quaint way of substituting your name for I much of the time, she thought. The English speakers, not many more than a dozen of them beyond Penny and Jesus, met inside a cafe in Montfort de Lemos, while, thanks to the unseasonably warm spell, the outdoor tables were still active and a guitarist was entertaining out there. The cafe was decorated for Christmas both inside and outside, and a portable heater warmed those outside. Galicians were fighting the march into the coldness of winter for as long as they could. Penny found the muffled sound of the Spanish guitar to be a mellowing influence on the buzz of English being spoken in the room, and she couldn't remain untouched by the decorations of the season. Those present constituted an almost equal proportion of Galicians, honing their language skills, and foreigners who already spoke English. She was especially smitten with a handsome man with a wavy mane of salt and pepper-hued hair, who who appeared to be in his mid-40s and who stood tall and straight and confident, commanding the room as he positioned himself by the fire and a Christmas tree. People were being drawn to him to bask in his smile and easy laughter, as he naturally became the focus of attention without consciously monopolizing attention. "Would you like to meet him?" Zeus said, leaning over to whisper in Penny's ear. "Who?" "Oh, the man over there with the books under his arm?" "Yes, that's Paolo, the one giving the readings this evening." Before Penny could say whether or not she wanted to meet him, Zeus had dragged her over to Paolo and was introducing her. The man turned a winning and interested smile on Penny, and she, like everyone else in the room had done, melted to him. "So, you have come to hear love poetry?" he asked. His voice was a rich baritone. He went on before she could answer. "I'm glad Cousin Zeus has brought new, and oh so lovely, blood into the group. We are usually quite sparse on poetry evening." "Poetry?" Penny asked, blushing because he had taken one of her hands in his, and she could feel a tingling sensation running up her arm. "Yes," he said, taking the books from under his arm and holding them up. "First our own Galician romance poet, Roselita de Castro, from her Cantares Gallegos. And then because Roselita can be so melancholy, and because this is an English-speaking group, from Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets from the Portuguese. So much more hopeful, don't you think? I'll read them both in Galician and English versions. I love the sound of the Galician language, but I don't want the English speakers to miss the power of the words. Roselita was the first one who wrote in our regional language, you know, and she was heavily criticized in Madrid for doing so. But now she's recognized as a national treasure. I hope you will love the sound of the poetry in Galician as well." "Yes, of course," Penny murmured, having no idea who De Castro was, but not wanting to disagree with anything this fabulous man beside her said. Then she laughed, and, eyes twinkling, Paolo laughed too, before a woman put a hand on his shoulder, saying she wanted to show him something about the lectern from which he'd be reading. Penny hadn't laughed about poetry, though, but because it had just hit her that Zeus had said he was a cousin. Yet more family. "Who is that fascinating man?" Penny asked Zeus as Paolo moved away from them. "You said he was a cousin." "That's Paolo Perez Varela, Rodrigo's younger brother. He teaches English literature at the University of Santiago de Compostela." "Rodrigo's brother?" Penny asked. "And is he as good as Rodrigo was?" Zeus laughed. "They were both very good men, Penny, but in different ways. Rodrigo was the better painter and Paolo the better poet. But, as men, both good, very good, yes. Very good family." Zeus, of course, didn't realize what Penny was really referring to, and only now, causing her to laugh a happy, tinkling laugh again, did Penny herself realize why she'd asked that question. She remembered now the sentence in Millie's letter, hoping that Penny could find as good a man here as Rodrigo had been. "Is he married?" she blurted out. Zeus laughed again. "Only to his poetry at this point. But he is a widower, and it's high time he found another worthy wife." Penny turned to look into Zeus's face to see that he was giving her a sharp look, amusement with something else in it, as well. Hope perhaps? Perhaps this outing to meet with other English speakers wasn't as random a choice of Zeus as she'd assumed. She blushed and decided she needed to change the subject. Not that she really was changing the subject. "You said that Vitor is the one who renovated the modern part of Millie's house. Do you think he'd be interested in renovating the other part too?" "I'm sure he would. Are you thinking of getting a better price for it fully renovated?" "I'm thinking of living there myself," Penny said, the answer surprising her as much as it obviously pleased Zeus. "Good," he said, and just then a waiter came up to them to get their drink orders. The waiter didn't seem to understand Penny's question of whether they had a favorite brand of local white wine. Zeus interjected with a, "I don't think he understands English. I'll ask him." Zeus speaks Galician. Jesus certainly does speak Galician, Penny thought, truly happy and content for the first time in years. She only now realized how long her elusive search for a family had been, and that she had found one for herself in Galicia, if she didn't screw this up. Or, rather, perhaps, Millie had given her a family as a last, parting gift, with an assist now from Zeus. She wasn't alone. If any people on earth understood what it meant to be Jesus people, she thought, it had to be the Galicians. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. Now let's begin this one. Ezra Blackwood's head felt like it was splitting in two. The harsh fluorescent light stabbed at his eyes as he struggled to focus on his surroundings. White walls, the antiseptic smell, a rhythmic beeping, Hospital. But why? He tried to piece together his fragmented memories. There had been a business trip, a last-minute flight to Chicago, the Hyatt Regency. He'd gotten back early, wanting to surprise Vivian. The sharp click of heels on linoleum snapped him back to the present. Vivian, his wife of 10 years, stood in the doorway, perfectly put together as always in her Chanel suit. Her manicured nails fidgeted with the strap of her Hermes bag. "I'm sorry you caught me with my lover in that hotel room," she said, her voice lacking any real remorse. "He didn't mean to knock you out cold, I swear. Please don't press charges." Ezra stared at her, rage building inside him like magma in a volcano. 10 years of marriage, a decade of shared dreams, struggles, triumphs. All of it a lie. "I'll destroy you both without the law," he replied, his voice hoarse but filled with icy determination. Vivian's concerned facade crumbled, replaced by a smirk that made Ezra's blood boil. She chuckled, the sound grating on his nerves. "Oh, honey, you'll be paying me alimony for the rest of your miserable life." As she turned to leave, something caught Ezra's eye. An emerald pendant hung around her neck, glinting in the harsh hospital lighting. He didn't recognize it. It certainly wasn't a family heirloom he would have known. A gift from her lover, no doubt. Another betrayal to add to the growing list. Before he could demand answers, a nurse bustled into the room. "Mr. Blackwood, you have another visitor. Your sister, Lydia?" Ezra's brow furrowed. He hadn't spoken to Lydia in years. What the hell was she doing here? The nurse ushered in a woman who bore little resemblance to the carefree girl Ezra remembered. Lydia Blackwood, now 35, carried herself with the wary confidence of someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. Her sharp eyes took in every detail of the room before settling on her brother. "Hello, Ezra," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's been a while." Ezra nodded, unsure how to respond. The last time they'd spoken had been at their father's funeral 10 years ago. James Blackwood's death in a car accident had shattered their family. Ezra had thrown himself into his legal career, determined to make his father proud. Lydia had chosen a different path. "I heard about what happened," Lydia continued, perching on the edge of a plastic chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Ezra growled. "What are you doing here, Lydia? Last I heard, you were chasing conspiracy theories halfway around the world." Lydia's eyes flashed with irritation. "I'm an investigative journalist, Ezra, and those conspiracy theories have uncovered some very real, very dangerous truths." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I've been investigating a series of corporate cover-ups. I think they're connected to Dad's death." Ezra scoffed. "Dad died in a car accident, Lydia. It was tragic, but it wasn't some grand conspiracy." "Was it?" Lydia challenged. "Have you ever looked into the circumstances? The brake failure, the convenient lack of witnesses." Ezra opened his mouth to argue, but Lydia pressed on. "I've uncovered links to a company called Nexichem. They're at the center of this whole mess." Nexichem. The name sent a chill down Ezra's spine. It was one of his firm's biggest clients. He'd personally handled several of their environmental compliance cases. "What do you know about Nexichem?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lydia's eyes narrowed. "More than I can safely share right now. But I think they're involved in something big, Ezra. Something deadly." Before Ezra could respond, he heard hushed voices outside his room. He recognized Vivian's voice, along with a man's he didn't know. The words Nexichem and silencing drifted through the partially open door. Lydia tensed, clearly having heard the same thing. "We can't talk here," she whispered. "It's not safe." As if on cue, a man appeared in the doorway. Felix Reeves, Ezra's longtime friend and a private investigator, surveyed the room with a practiced eye. "Ready to blow this popsicle stand?" Felix asked, his casual tone belying the concern in his eyes. "I've got a car waiting." Ezra nodded, suddenly eager to be anywhere but here. As Felix helped him out of bed, Lydia gathered his belongings. "We'll go to my place," she said quietly. We have a lot to discuss. Felix's car wound through the city streets, the tension in the vehicle palpable. Ezra's mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. His perfect life had shattered in an instant, and now his estranged sister was talking about conspiracies and cover-ups. They pulled up to a nondescript apartment building. Lydia led them up 3 flights of stairs, constantly checking over her shoulder. She unlocked a heavy door and ushered them inside. The apartment was small but neat, filled with stacks of papers and multiple computer screens. A young woman with bright blue hair looked up from one of the computers, her eyes widening at the sight of the newcomers. "Ezra, Felix, this is my roommate, Zara Chun," Lydia said. "Zara, this is my brother Ezra and his friend Felix." Zara nodded curtly, her gaze lingering on Ezra. "The corporate lawyer," she said, her tone making it clear that wasn't a compliment. Ezra bristled. "Environmental law. Actually, I specialize in helping companies comply with regulations and clean up contaminated sites." Something in Zara's expression shifted. "Really? That's not what I expected." Before Ezra could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Harold Winters, his law firm partner. With a sigh, he answered, "Ezra, where the hell are you?" Harold's voice was tense. "Vivian's already filed for divorce. She's seeking a substantial settlement." Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. "What? How is that even possible? It's been less than a day." "I don't know, but her lawyers are moving fast. We need to talk strategy. Can you come in?" I'll be there as soon as I can," Ezra said, his mind reeling. He hung up and turned to the others. "I have to go to the office. Vivian's already filed for divorce." Lydia's eyes narrowed. That was fast. Too fast. "Ezra, before you go, there's something you need to see." She pulled out a file and spread its contents on the coffee table. "These are the results of my investigation into Nexichem. There's a pattern of environmental violations, suspicious accidents at their facilities, and, well, look at this." Ezra leaned in, his legal mind immediately spotting the irregularities in the documents. "This can't be right. These violation reports, they're identical to the ones I filed, but the data's been altered." Zara spoke up, her earlier hostility replaced by professional interest. "I've been helping Lydia dig into Nexichem's digital footprint. Their security is tight, but I've managed to find some discrepancies in their financial records." As if on cue, one of Zara's computers pinged. She rushed over, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Holy shit. Ezra, I think this is for you." She turned the screen, revealing an encrypted email addressed to Ezra. With shaking hands, he entered his password. The message opened, revealing partial financial records that hinted at massive bribes paid by Nexichem to various officials and law firms, including Ezra's own. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Ezra felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his career, even his father's death was suddenly in question. Felix was the first to break the silence. "Well, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a good old-fashioned conspiracy. What's the play?" Lydia looked at Ezra, her expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. "That depends on you, big brother. Are you in?" Ezra glanced around the room, at his estranged sister who had never given up searching for the truth, at the brilliant hacker who had put aside her prejudices to help, at his loyal friend ready to dive into danger. Then he thought of Vivian's betrayal, of the altered documents, of his father's suspicious death. He took a deep breath. "I'm in. Let's take these bastards down." Zara grinned, cracking her knuckles as she turned back to her computer. "Now we're talking. Let's see what else we can dig up on Nexichem." As the team began to formulate their plan, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger and more dangerous than any of them realized. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it, no matter the cost. Ezra Blackwood straightened his tie, his face a mask of professional detachment as he strode into the offices of Winters, Blackwood, and Associates. The familiar scent of leather and expensive cologne did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him. Every face he passed, every greeting he returned, it all felt like a lie now. He nodded to his secretary, Sarah, as he passed. "Any messages?" "Mr. Winters wants to see you in his office as soon as possible," Sarah replied, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right, Mr. Blackwood? There are rumors." Ezra forced a smile. Just a bit under the weather. Nothing to worry about. As soon as his office door closed behind him, Ezra's facade crumbled. He sank into his chair, his mind racing. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many of his colleagues were involved? He booted up his computer, heart pounding as he began to dig through the firm's files on Nexichem. What he found made his blood run cold. Report after report of environmental violations, all neatly covered up with falsified data and legal sleight of hand. And there, buried in a subfolder, was a document detailing a toxic waste spill in a low-income neighborhood. The cancer rates in the area had skyrocketed, but Nexichem had managed to dodge all responsibility. Ezra felt sick. He had built his career on protecting the environment, on holding corporations accountable. And all this time, he had been part of the problem. A commotion outside his office pulled him from his thoughts. He recognized that voice, Vivian. "I don't care if he's busy. He's my husband, and I need to speak with him now." Ezra steeled himself as the door burst open. Vivian stormed in, her eyes blazing with a fury he had never seen before. "You think you can just disappear and ignore my calls?" she hissed. "My lawyers are going to bury you, Ezra. Unless what?" Ezra asked, his voice deceptively calm. Vivian's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Unless you agree to my terms. No questions asked, no fights. You give me what I want, or I'll make sure everyone knows about your dirty little secrets." Ezra's mind raced. What secrets? He had always been faithful, always played by the rules. Then he saw it, the watch on Vivian's wrist. It was too large for her, clearly a man's watch, and he recognized it. It belonged to Harold Winters. Before he could process this new betrayal, his phone buzzed. A message from Harold. "My office. Now." Ezra stood, straightening his suit. "We're not done here, Vivian." Her laughter followed him out the door. "Oh, we're just getting started, darling." Harold's office was a shrine to old money and power. The man himself sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his fingers steepled as he watched Ezra enter. "Sit down, Ezra," Harold said, his tone deceptively friendly. "We need to talk about Nexichem." Ezra's heart skipped a beat. He fought to keep his expression neutral as he took a seat. "What about them?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "I've heard rumors that you've been investigating our biggest client. I'm sure I don't need to remind you about client confidentiality." The threat was clear. Ezra felt a chill run down his spine. "Of course not," he replied smoothly. "I'm just doing my due diligence, making sure all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed." Harold nodded, but his eyes remained cold. "See that you do. Nexichem is very important to this firm. It would be a shame if anything were to jeopardize that relationship." As Ezra left Harold's office, his phone buzzed again. A message from Felix. "Got something you need to see. Meet me at the usual spot." An hour later, Ezra sat in a dimly lit bar, watching surveillance footage on Felix's laptop. His stomach churned as he saw Harold, Vivian, and a man he recognized as Marcus Thorne, Nexichem's CEO, meeting at a secluded marina. "When was this taken?" Ezra asked, his voice hoarse. Felix's expression was grim. 2 days ago." "Ezra, I think your wife's affair, it wasn't just about sex. I think it was orchestrated to keep you in check." Ezra nodded, the pieces falling into place. His own firm, his own wife. They were all part of Nexichem's web of deceit, and he had been the fool at the center of it all. "We need to bring them down," Ezra said, his voice filled with cold determination. "All of them." Felix nodded, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. "Where do we start?" Zara's fingers flew across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. Lydia paced behind her, while Ezra sat perfectly still, his lawyer's mind cataloging every detail. "Got it," Zara announced, her voice tight with excitement. "I've decrypted the anonymous email. You're not going to believe this." The screen's filled with financial records, showing a complex web of transactions between Nexichem, Winters, Blackwood and Associates, and a dozen shell companies. "It's a massive money laundering operation," Lydia breathed, her journalist instincts on fire. "They're hiding millions in bribes and payoffs." Ezra's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Need to talk. It's about Nexichem. Meet me in the parking garage. Level B2. Mia." He recognized the name. Mia Rodriguez, a paralegal at the firm. Young, ambitious, and sharp as a tack. What did she know? "I have to go," Ezra said, standing abruptly. "Keep digging. We need everything you can find." The parking garage was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and exhaust. Ezra's footsteps echoed as he made his way to level B2. A figure emerged from the shadows, Mia, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, glancing around nervously. I found something about Nexichem. I think they're dumping toxic waste illegally." Ezra's heart raced. "Tell me everything." Mia's words tumbled out in a rush. She had been organizing files when she stumbled across documents detailing Nexichem's illegal activities. For months, she had been quietly gathering evidence, terrified of what might happen if she came forward. "I want to do the right thing," Mia said, her voice shaking. "But I'm scared. These people, they're powerful. They're dangerous." Ezra placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Mia. We'll protect you. I promise." As they formulated a plan for Mia to act as a whistleblower, with Ezra as her legal representation, Lydia made another breakthrough. She uncovered old news articles suggesting that their father, James Blackwood, had been investigating Nexichem before his death. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more horrifying than any of them had imagined. But as they prepared to go public with their evidence, a new complication arose. Vivian reached out to Ezra, her voice honey-sweet on the phone. "Darling, I've made a terrible mistake. Can we meet? I want to make things right." Ezra's instinct screamed that it was a trap, but he saw an opportunity. "Of course," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Our usual place." As Vivian spun her tale of manipulation and regret, Ezra discreetly recorded every word. He didn't believe her for a second, but her confession might prove useful. Their celebration was short-lived, however. Zara discovered that their communications had been compromised. Nexichem's private security force was watching their every move. The net was closing in, but Ezra and his team were ready for a fight. The abandoned Nexichem research facility loomed before them, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Ezra's heart pounded as he and Felix approached, their footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. Mia had vanished without a trace, just as they were preparing to go public with their evidence. Felix had traced her last known location to this facility, and now they were walking into what felt very much like a trap. "I don't like this," Felix muttered, his hand hovering near the gun concealed under his jacket. "It's too quiet." Ezra nodded. "We don't have a choice. Mia risked everything to help us. We can't abandon her now." They found a rusted side door, the lock easily picked by Felix's skilled hands. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of chemicals. Their flashlights revealed abandoned equipment, shattered glass, and ominous dark stains on the floor. As they delved deeper into the facility, they stumbled upon a room that made Ezra's blood run cold. It was a makeshift laboratory, filled with bubbling vats of noxious liquid and cages that had clearly once held test subjects. The implications were horrifying. "My God!" Felix whispered, snapping photos with his phone. "This is way bigger than we thought. They're not just dumping toxic waste. They're creating it." A noise from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps getting closer. They ducked behind a large piece of equipment, hearts racing as a group of men entered the room. At their head was Marcus Thorne, Nexichem CEO, his expensive suit incongruous in the decrepit lab. "Find them," Marcus snarled to his security team. "They can't be allowed to leave here alive." Ezra and Felix exchanged a look of panic. They were trapped, outgunned, and running out of options. But before they could move, another figure entered the room, Lydia. Ezra's heart stopped. What was his sister doing here? But as he watched, his confusion turned to horror. Lydia walked up to Marcus, her posture relaxed, familiar. "The basement is clear," she reported. "No sign of them." Marcus nodded. "Good work, Agent Blackwood. Your cover has been invaluable to us." Ezra felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Lydia, working for Nexichem? It couldn't be true. But as he watched his sister interact with the man responsible for so much suffering, doubt crept in. Had everything been a lie? The standoff that followed was tense, with Lydia clearly torn between her loyalty to her brother and her commitment to whatever mission she was on. Ezra's mind raced, trying to make sense of this betrayal. But there was no time for explanations. As Marcus's men closed in, violence erupted. In the chaos, Felix was hit, crying out in pain as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Ezra managed to fight his way to a locked door, behind which they found Mia, terrified but alive. As they fled the facility, alarms blaring and gunshots echoing behind them, Lydia appeared one last time. She pressed a USB drive into Ezra's hand, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll explain everything, I promise. But you have to go. Now." Ezra hesitated, 1,000 questions on his lips. But with Felix bleeding and Mia shaking with fear, he knew they had no choice. They ran into the night, leaving Lydia behind to maintain her cover, whatever that truly meant. As they sped away in Felix's car, Ezra clutched the USB drive, his mind reeling. The evidence they had gathered, the risks they had taken, the betrayals they had suffered. It all paled in comparison to the realization that this conspiracy went deeper than any of them had imagined. And at the center of it all was his sister, a woman he thought he knew, now a stranger playing a game he didn't understand. As the city lights blurred past, Ezra made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Nexichem, Winters, Blackwood, and Associates, even Lydia herself, they would all face justice. The web of deceit was vast, but Ezra was done being a fly caught in its strands. It was time to become the spider. The safe house was a far cry from the luxury Ezra Blackwood was accustomed to. Peeling wallpaper, the musty smell of old books, and a pervasive dampness that seemed to seep into his bones. But right now, it was the safest place in the world. Ezra sat at a rickety table, his laptop open before him, surrounded by stacks of documents. Across from him, Mia Rodriguez pored over financial records, her brow furrowed in concentration. In the corner, Zara's fingers flew across her keyboard, the glow of multiple screens illuminating her face in the dim room. They had been here for days, maybe weeks. Time had become a blur. Felix's activist contacts had come through, providing them with a network of safe houses to move between. But the constant fear of discovery, the paranoia that each shadow held an enemy, was taking its toll. Ezra rubbed his eyes, trying to focus on the document before him. His mind kept drifting to Lydia, his sister, the undercover agent. The betrayal still stung, even as he tried to rationalize it. Was she really on their side? Or had everything been a lie? Holy shit! Zara's voice cut through the silence. You guys need to see this. Ezra and Mia crowded around Zara's workstation. On the screen, plans for a massive construction project unfolded. They're planning to dump toxic waste in the Oakwood Nature Reserve, Zara explained, her voice tight with anger. If this goes through, it'll contaminate the groundwater for the entire region. Ezra felt his stomach churn. Oakwood was one of the last unspoiled areas in the state, home to endangered species and a vital water source for surrounding communities. "We can't let this happen," Mia said, her voice shaking with determination. "We have to stop them." Ezra nodded, his mind already racing with legal strategies. "We need more evidence. Concrete proof that links Nexichem to the dump site." As if on cue, Ezra's burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Ezra," Vivian's voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need to talk. I want to help." Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I know things, Ezra. Things that could bring down Nexichem, Harold. All of them. Meet me, please. For old time's sake." Ezra's mind raced. It could be a trap, but if Vivian was telling the truth, her testimony could be the key to breaking the case wide open. "I'll think about it," he said finally and hung up. Zara and Mia looked at him expectantly. Ezra sighed. "That was Vivian. She says she wants to help." Mia's eyes widened. "You can't seriously be considering trusting her." "We don't have to trust her," Ezra replied, a plan forming in his mind. "But we can use her. If she's genuine, great. If not, well, we'll be ready." As they began to formulate a plan, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Nexichem's toxic dump could happen any day now. They needed to act fast. But first, he had a decision to make about Lydia. His sister was in deep, playing a dangerous game. Could he trust the information she was feeding them? Or was she leading them into a trap? Ezra stared at the USB drive Lydia had pressed into his hand during their escape from the Nexichem facility. He hadn't told the others about it yet. With a deep breath, he plugged it in. What he found made his blood run cold. Detailed plans of Nexichem's operations, financial records, emails implicating high-level government officials. And at the center of it all, a name that made Ezra's heart stop, James Blackwood. Their father hadn't just been investigating Nexichem before his death. He had uncovered a conspiracy that went far beyond corporate greed. This was about power, about control over the most basic human need, water. Ezra leaned back, his mind reeling. They weren't just fighting a corporation anymore. They were up against a system, a web of corruption that stretched from the boardroom to the highest levels of government. He looked at Mia and Zara, both still poring over documents, unaware of the bombshell Ezra had just uncovered. They had all risked everything to get this far. Now, it was time to take the biggest risk of all. "Pack up," Ezra said, his voice filled with determination. "We're going to meet Vivian, and then we're going to bring the whole damn system down." The Nexichem boardroom was a study in corporate opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the polished mahogany table reflected the concerned faces of the board members gathered around it. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Nexichem, stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence noticeably shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that these allegations are completely unfounded. Nexichem has always operated within the bounds of the law." From her seat at the table, Lydia Blackwood fought to keep her expression neutral. Years of undercover work had honed her poker face, but even she was finding it difficult to maintain her composure. Everything was coming to a head, and she prayed that Ezra's plan would work. As if on cue, the doors burst open. Ezra strode in, Mia at his side, followed by a team of federal agents. The room erupted in chaos. "Marcus Thorne," Ezra's voice cut through the commotion, "you and your co-conspirators are under arrest for environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. You have no authority." "Oh, but we do," Mia interrupted, her voice steady despite her nervousness. She nodded to Zara, who had slipped in unnoticed during the confusion. Suddenly, every screen in the room came to life. Financial records, emails, surveillance footage. All the evidence they had painstakingly gathered over the past weeks played out for all to see. "At this very moment," Ezra continued, "this evidence is being broadcast to every Nexichem employee, shareholder, and regulatory agency. The game is over, Marcus. Lydia stood, finally dropping her cover. And that's not all. We have proof that Nexichem was responsible for the death of James Blackwood, a man who threatened to expose your plan to monopolize water resources through deliberate contamination. The color drained from Marcus's face. He lunged for his laptop, likely containing even more incriminating evidence. But Ezra was faster. What followed was a desperate chase through the Nexichem headquarters. Ezra pursued Marcus through winding corridors and up staircases, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly empty building. They burst onto the roof. The city spread out before them. Marcus stood at the edge, the hard drive clutched in his hand, the wind whipping his usually immaculate suit. "It's over, Marcus," Ezra called out, cautiously approaching. "There's nowhere left to run." Marcus turned, a wild look in his eyes. "You don't understand, Blackwood. This goes beyond Nexichem, beyond me. We were creating a better world. By poisoning people? By killing my father." Ezra's voice cracked with emotion. "How is that a better world?" "Resources are running out," Marcus snarled. "Water is the new oil. Whoever controls it controls everything. Your father was too idealistic to see that. Just like you." Ezra took another step forward. "It doesn't have to be this way, Marcus. Turn yourself in. Tell the truth. Maybe then we can actually build a better world." For a moment, it seemed like Marcus might consider it. Then, with a bitter laugh, he hurled the hard drive off the roof. Ezra lunged for it, but it was too late. The small device disappeared into the city below, taking with it the names of countless corrupt officials. As the authorities led Marcus away, Ezra stood at the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The congressional hearing room was packed. Journalists, activists, and curious citizens filled every available seat, while cameras broadcast the proceedings to millions around the world. Ezra adjusted his tie, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. Beside him, Lydia gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Despite the years of separation and recent revelations, they were in this together now. "Mr. Blackwood," the committee chairman began, "please tell us in your own words what you uncovered about Nexichem and its collaborators." For the next several hours, Ezra and Lydia laid out the entire conspiracy, the environmental violations, the cover-ups, the bribes, and finally, the truth about their father's death. As they spoke, screens around the room displayed evidence, much of it provided by Harold Winters in exchange for a plea deal. In another part of the city, Vivian Blackwood was led away from her private jet in handcuffs, her attempt to flee the country thwarted by an anonymous tip. Back in the hearing room, Ezra concluded his testimony. Nexichem's crimes are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper sickness in our society, where profit is prioritized over people, and the environment is seen as a resource to be exploited rather than protected. It's time for a change. The aftermath of the hearing was a whirlwind. Indictments were handed down, regulations were tightened, and a national conversation about corporate responsibility and environmental protection took center stage. Months passed. Ezra found himself standing before a group of eager law students, their faces a mix of idealism and uncertainty that reminded him of himself. Not so long ago. "The law is a powerful tool," he told them, "but it's only as good as the people wielding it. You have the power to shape the future, to fight for justice, to protect those who can't protect themselves. Use it wisely." As the students filed out, Ezra's phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. Her book, Exposing Corporate Environmental Crimes, was hitting shelves next week, another step in their ongoing fight. Later that evening, Ezra met with Felix and Zara at their new office. The sign on the door read Clearwater Tech, Innovative Solutions for a Cleaner Future. Felix, his arm still in a sling but his spirit unbroken, grinned as Ezra entered. "Welcome to the revolution, counselor." Zara looked up from her computer, her eyes bright with excitement. "We just finalized the plans for our first water purification plant. Want to see?" As Ezra looked over the plans, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in years. They had a long way to go, but they were on the right path. His phone buzzed again. A message from Mia, now in her second year of law school, top of her class. She was interning at an environmental law firm over the summer and wanted Ezra's advice on a case. Ezra smiled as he typed his reply. The fight for justice was far from over, but they weren't in it alone anymore. A new generation was rising, armed with knowledge, passion, and the determination to make a difference. As he left the office that night, Ezra paused to look up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. Somewhere up there, he liked to think his father was watching, proud of what they had accomplished and what they continued to fight for. The web of deceit had been torn down, but the work of rebuilding, of creating a more just and sustainable world, was just beginning. And Ezra Blackwood was ready for the challenge. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you